Chapter 821. 3-in-1 Great Chapter, Banquet in the Palace. Shui Rui could hold his liquor very well. Usually he would not get drunk even if he drank 8 or 10 jars. But tonight he did not reject anyone and drank too much. Who knew that he did it on purpose, revealing a little of his arrogance after drinking, to tempt those officials who were jealous of his meteoric rise to criticize him. There were always factions fighting in the court. Fighting for fame and profit was the norm in officialdom. The officials who had followed the Yan Emperor to conquer the country would inevitably be unequal when it came time to split the spoils. But he was the only one who was bestowed the title of king and prime minister, standing above everyone else. There were many who were dissatisfied. As he had expected, there were people who could not stand his complacency and jumped out in the middle of the banquet. First, they accused him of overthrowing the officials of the previous dynasty, taking the opportunity to amass wealth and buy people's hearts. If the Yan Emperor was not a magnanimous ruler, he would be dissatisfied with Shui Rui just because of this. Luckily, Shui Rui had already reported to the emperor beforehand. Overthrowing the officials of the previous dynasty was approved by the emperor. As for the accusation of amassing wealth, it was even more groundless and there was no real evidence. Shui Rui spoke out to defend himself, and he poured out his grievances in front of all the civil and military officials of the imperial court. Do all of you think recruiting envoys is a good job? You can make those scholars who view their reputation as more important than their lives to work for the imperial court for the sake of a few stones of salary? Recruiting enlistment, that is a technical job. Do you really think anyone can do it? Relying on the fact that he was a little drunk, Shui Rui spoke straightforwardly. I told them that His Majesty is a wise man who treats the wise with respect and benevolence. As long as they are willing to work for the common people and contribute to the country, His Majesty will not mind their background. I tried my best to persuade them, and only then did I manage to persuade 30% of the ambitious men to pledge their loyalty to Great Yan Dynasty. Furthermore, the war has just ended. The people of the world are in trouble. The court is in turmoil and the foreign countries are watching. In such a situation we should give up our personal interests for the greater good. So I persuaded 30% of the knowledgeable people to forsake the darkness and join the light. Also, Jun Shang's action of not killing the previous dynasty's fallen ruler has moved 30% of the people who are loyal to Jun Shang, and they are willing to serve Jun Shang. His words not only flattered the emperor, but also the group of old courtiers. No one would expose his coercion and bribery tactics. Their old faces flushed red and they all pretended to be angry from embarrassment. They glared at the courtier who had accused His Highness of selling official titles. If he dared to say another word, they would rush forward and fight him to the death. Even the Emperor of Yan nodded his head as he comforted Shui Rui. I know that it's not easy for you. I was the one who allowed you to resume your duties. From today onwards, I will not forgive anyone who speaks ill of you. He was obviously supporting Shui Rui. The new Minister of Revenue who opposed Shui Rui was unwilling to accept this. He relied on the fact that he had followed the Jiang clan for a few dozen years and refused to let Shui Rui off the hook. He asked in an arrogant manner, "Then how do you explain the matter of King Ping harboring an important minister of the previous dynasty?" Shui Rui frowned and said, "Why do you say so, Minister?" Minister Ning said reasonably, "Your Royal Highness, you don't have to play dumb. I have already investigated. Half a month ago you were ordered to attack the capital. At that time, not only did you capture the fallen emperor, you also captured the previous dynasty's celestial commissioner, Grand Commissioner Yu Shu. You brought her back to the military camp and detained her privately. This Grand Commissioner is a woman and there are many rumors among the people. It is said that she was taught by immortals and has the ability to cast beams into soldiers to summon wind and rain. Some even said that the previous dynasty was able to enjoy 300 years of peace and prosperity because of the Celestial Commissioner. As the head of the Celestial Commissioner, Grand Commissioner Yu Shu plays an important role. Since you captured this woman, you did not immediately present her to His Majesty. Is it not because you have ulterior motives and are plotting something?" Shui Rui pursed his lips and looked troubled. He did not refute immediately. This made Minister Ning even more certain that he was up to no good. He became even more aggressive. "Your Royal Highness, you are not speaking. Are you feeling guilty?" Shui Rui ignored him and turned to face the emperor. He looked embarrassed and said, "Allow me to report in private." The Yan Emperor already knew that he had an engagement with the female courtier. He thought that he was doing it out of selfishness and it was not good for him to talk about it in public. He was about to nod and agree when Minister Ning did not spare him and interrupted. "Your Royal Highness, why don't you dare to say it in front of others? Could it be that you have some shady business with that woman?" He was deliberately provoking Shui Rui and was waiting for him to get angry. He spoke without thinking and his methods were not clever. If it was any other time Shui Rui would just laugh it off. However, he was drunk tonight and was not as good-tempered as usual. He did not know which sore spot was stepped on. He was so angry that his eyes turned red and he sneered again and again. His 2 fingers formed a sword and pointed angrily at others. You are all filthy. How can you measure the heart of a gentleman with the heart of a villain? I am magnanimous. After being slandered by you, I only treated it as a dog barking and did not want to argue with you. However, that official Yu is like a beautiful orchid. I admire her and will not allow you to insult her like this. Minister Ning was dumbfounded by his blatant words of protection, and the crowd was also in an uproar. But this time Shui Rui did not wait for the other to grab hold of his words and turn towards the Yan Emperor again. Holding back a belly full of indignation, he said truthfully, regardless of the previous dynasty or this dynasty, since ancient times until now, as an official, talent and ability are still secondary. The most important thing is loyalty. That day your younger brother led the troops to attack Enling and captured the ruler of the fallen country. Inside and outside the capital, only the Tidian came to the rescue. Although he was alone and weak, he was eventually subdued by your younger brother. However, in terms of loyalty and courage, he is worthy of praise and respect. As a woman, she is more responsible than most men in this world. Just now, Minister Ning was right about one thing. Before entering the capital this time, I received a secret report and learned that the 300 years of peace of the previous dynasty is indeed closely related to the Celestial Commissioner. He took a deep breath and brought up the matter of enlistment. I have said before that with the virtuous character of the Emperor and my silver tongue, I have indeed persuaded 90% of the wise men to abandon the dark and join the light. However, there is still the remaining 10% that I can do nothing about. The officials of the Celestial Commissioner are all in a group. As long as they don't see the Commissioner, they will not surrender. From this, it can be seen that in order to subdue the Celestial Commissioner, we need to subdue the Commissioner first. I am ashamed to say this. After capturing the Commissioner that day, I tried to persuade her to surrender to the Great Yen. However, she refused to submit despite threats and temptations. If I had not told her that the Emperor of Da'an was trapped and not dead, she would have already killed herself and died for the country. Shui Rui sighed and shook his head. He looked at the Emperor with a little shame and a little guilty. When the Emperor of Yen saw such a look, he suddenly understood. He thought to himself, no wonder this boy was hesitating before. It turns out that he has not settled the girl yet and has come to me on his own initiative to ask for a decree to marry her. The Emperor of Yen felt angry and funny at the same time. However, his focus was still on the sentence. The Celestial Commissioner is closely related to the peace and prosperity. After a moment of silence, he glanced at the people under his seat and said loudly, such a noble and pure woman with amazing talent, it is indeed a pity to kill her. If she can surrender to our dynasty, I will treat her with courtesy and will not disgrace her. Shui Rui lowered his eyes and a light flashed in them. How did Minister Ning know that Yushu was kidnapped by him, and how did he know about the secret of the Celestial Commissioner? It was all arranged by him and instigated by someone so that Minister Ning would question him in public. And what he was waiting for was this sentence from the Emperor of Yen. With everyone's eyes and hundreds of ears hearing it, in the future, even if Yushu surrendered to the Great Yen, no one could criticize her. He had set up this trap tonight so that the Emperor would personally give her a proper name. Your Majesty is benevolent and virtuous. Your name will go down in history for thousands of years. Shui Rui took off his robe and knelt on the ground, sincerely kowtowing and shouting. There was a buzzing sound in the hall. Then dozens of old officials of the previous dynasty left their seats and kowtowed excitedly. They were impressed by the benevolence of the current emperor. Even the important officials of the previous dynasty like the commissioner could let go of their prejudice and treat them kindly, let alone these people. The uneasiness in everyone's heart was dispelled, and a sense of belonging grew in them. From now on, the previous dynasty was an old dream, and they were the officials of the Great Yen. All the officials were loyal, so the Emperor of Yen was naturally happy to see this scene. He cracked a smile right away and didn't fuss about Shui Rui playing tricks before his eyes. Seeing this, all the officials knew in their hearts that the arm could not twist the thigh. In terms of means and favor, Minister Ning could not be compared to King Ping. All right, you may all rise. The Emperor of Yen raised his hand, signaling for everyone to return to their seats. He then glanced at Minister Ning, who was standing there blowing his beard and glaring. He was unhappy that he did not know how to read the situation, but it was not good to flare up at him on the spot. So he casually said, "You are all the pillars of the great Yen, my officials? No matter where you come from, I will treat you all equally. In the future, don't mention the previous dynasty or the current dynasty." Another round of cheers rang out from the crowd. After the banquet, the Emperor of Yen summoned Shui Rui to the side hall for a heart-to-heart talk. "What is going on with the Celestial Commissioner? Why haven't I heard you mention it before today?" The Emperor of Yen purposely kept a straight face. Shui Rui shook his head, a little tipsy, his tone slow. "I only know some rumors and have not confirmed it. How would I dare to speak nonsense in front of your majesty? That is a crime of deceiving your majesty. Speak freely." The Emperor of Yen put down his imperial airs and pointed to a chair for him to sit down. "In private, there is no need to adhere to your etiquette of an official." Shui Rui's shoulders drooped, and he didn't seem so reserved anymore. He rubbed his forehead and said slowly, "My lord is clearly aware of this subject's background. The person who raised me is the previous dynasty's right minister, Shui Lingnan. The Shui clan has produced generations of high-ranking officials, so there's bound to be some information that no one knows about. As for the imperial astronomer, there's indeed such a rumor. Emperor and had relied on the might of the 6 tools of founding to unify the country 300 years ago, and it was precisely because of the existence of the 6 tools of founding that the Yin dynasty was able to continue standing for 300 years. And the purpose of Empress Ningxin establishing the Celestial Commissioner was to let the successive generations of officials inherit the 6 tools of the founding nation and protect the royal family. 5 years ago, he brought his father and brothers to Ningdong City to seek refuge with Jiang Huaying, who had not yet become independent. At that time, he did not divulge the secret of the Book of Mystic Fairy Lu Rin, but he confessed his background. He lied that more than 20 years ago, his biological father Yunhua was assassinated because he was involved in the fight for the throne. He had no choice but to entrust him to the Shui family, and his adoptive father Shui Zhao was implicated because of this. Later, he reunited with Yunhua and his father, and learned that the murderer who killed his adoptive father Shui Zhao was Zhu Muzhao, the great minister of the Celestial Commissioner at that time. It was also the same person who sent people to kill his biological mother, and the mastermind was Emperor Zhaoqing. Because of the new hatred and old hatred, he could not live under the same sky with the imperial court of Dan. Therefore he betrayed the Shui family and went to assist Jiang Huaying in conquering the world. I have also heard about the 6 tools of the founding nation. The rumor is just an exaggeration. Otherwise, how can I conquer the world?" The Emperor of Yen said disapprovingly. Shui Rui shook his head and leaned forward slightly. His eyes flickered as he said, "Your Majesty, you may not know this, but the 6 tools of the founding nation of Dan were lost many years ago. Since then, the fate of the nation has declined. Otherwise, how could the 300 years of foundation of the great Yen be overturned so easily in just 5 years?" The Emperor of Yan's expression changed as he looked at him doubtfully. Shui Rui added more firewood, striking while the iron was hot. "I dare not say for sure what the truth is, but I know someone who definitely knows the secret of the 6 tools of the founding nation." "You mean that you family?" "That's her." Shui Rui had aroused the emperor's curiosity. Without keeping him in suspense, he said, "Zhu Muzhao could have passed the position of the great minister to anyone, but he chose her. There must be something fishy about it. I've asked her about it. Although she refused to say it, it was inevitable that she would reveal something in her words. Therefore, I speculated that her rapid rise in power must be related to the 6 tools of the founding nation. It is highly possible that she knows the whereabouts of the lost 6 tools. That's why Zhu Muzhao placed the hope of the nation on her. He stood his ground and put her in charge of the Celestial Commissioner." The Emperor of Yen only took Yushu seriously after he heard him speak frankly, and he glanced at Shui Rui before asking with a rather deep meaning in his words. "Since you've told me the truth, aren't you afraid that I'll execute the Yu clan for the sake of eliminating the root of the problem?" Shui Rui laughed with some satisfaction, revealing his drunken state. His words became presumptuous. "I'm afraid. That's why I locked her up and tried to persuade her to submit to the great Yen. In this way, sworn brother, you will not kill her. Not only will you not kill her, you will also put her in an important position." The Emperor of Yen studied him for a moment. Suddenly he shook his head and laughed. He pointed at him and said, "What an infatuated person." After going around in circles, he was still trying to put in a good word for you family in front of him, afraid that she would be wronged. However, regarding the 6 tools of the founding nation, it was better to believe it than not. "I will give you a deadline of 3 days. If you family is willing to confess the secret of the 6 tools of the founding nation, I promise you that I will also appoint her as the celestial commissioner. Then I will appoint a marriage between the two of you." Shui Rui's eyes brightened. He immediately stood up and bowed, as if afraid that the emperor would go back on his words. "On behalf of you family, I thank your majesty for your grace." Late at night the banquet ended. Outside Donghua Gate, a few drunken officials could be seen with their arms around each other's shoulders, calling each other brothers. They were reluctant to leave in their carriages. Shui Rui's legs were a little weak. He was helped into the sedan by a servant. As the curtain was put down, he let out a long sigh. He supported his burning forehead with one hand and undid the jade buckle on his collar with the other. His chest and back were soaked with sweat. Tonight he had played tricks in front of the emperor. In reality he had taken a big risk. He had been careful step by step. He was afraid that if he was not careful, it would backfire and cause the emperor to suspect that he had ulterior motives for protecting Yushu. Thus, he had made his feelings clear to the emperor early on. He had confessed that he and Yushu had been engaged to each other. First impressions were strong, so that the emperor would think that his every action was due to love affairs and not suspect him. He had paved the way for Yushu. As long as she took one step forward, she would be able to rise to the top. Shui Rui set his mind at ease as he had a load off his mind. Sitting in the sedan he swayed back and forth. After a while he dozed off. In his daze he felt that the sedan had stopped. He heard someone talking in a low voice outside. He furrowed his brows and asked with his eyes still closed, "Where are we?" The person who answered outside was not one of his attendants. "Your Highness, something happened outside the city. Someone set fire to the barracks at night and burned a few of the tents." Shui Rui suddenly woke up and pulled open the curtain of the sedan. In a deep voice he asked, "Are there any casualties?" The person who came hurriedly replied, "Only 2 soldiers who were fighting the fire were slightly injured." "Official, you caught the person who set the fire. Please go back and punish him." Shui Rui's heart tightened and then relaxed. His drunkenness had completely disappeared. He immediately got out of the sedan and ordered people to prepare a horse. He rushed to the barracks outside the city. There was a curfew in the city. Fortunately, the soldiers guarding the eastern part of the city were all under his command. Once they saw his people, there was no reason for them not to leave the city. The horse galloped all the way to the barracks. By dawn, the fire had been extinguished and the air was filled with the smell of burning. Shui Rui saw that the collapsed tents were not far from the residence that he had arranged for Yushu. The expression on his face was very ugly. "Where is official Yu?" Shui Rui's personal guards all knew that their highness treated this female official of the Yin dynasty very differently. Thus, no one was stupid enough to imprison her as a criminal. Tonight, Yushu hid out and waited for the fire to be extinguished. No one forced her to return to her residence. "Reporting to your highness, official Yu is currently in the eastern tent." Shui Rui turned around and headed east. He didn't go far before he saw the maidservant outside the tent yawning. When she saw him, she hurriedly covered her mouth and lowered her body. "Your highness, you're finally back. Master has been waiting for you for a long time." Shui Rui nodded his head and pushed aside the curtain to enter. There were a few candles lit inside the tent, which dimly illuminated 3 people. Yushu was sitting in the position that he used to order soldiers. She was supporting her head with her hands and dozing off. Her clothes were thin, so it was obvious that she wasn't injured. He first let out a sigh of relief. Although he had heard that nothing happened to her, he still wanted to see with his own eyes that she was unharmed. Afterwards he turned his attention to the other 2 people. One was the expressionless man, and the other was clearly under someone else's control. Jiang Mia. In the blink of an eye, he had guessed who the main culprit of tonight's disturbance was. Jiang Mia's phoenix eyes glared fiercely at Shui Rui, who had just entered from outside. She gritted her teeth and said, "Lu Shining, quickly tell them to release this princess. Otherwise you'll see what happens to you." Yushu was awakened by her voice. When she opened her eyes and saw that Shui Rui had arrived, she stretched and rubbed her neck while pointing at Jiang Mia. She said to him, "You're finally back. Here I caught the thief who set the fire. What do you think we should do with him?" However, she didn't take the initiative to mention that Jiang Mia had tried to assassinate her. It wasn't because she was afraid of Jiang Mia's identity, but because she didn't want to make things difficult for Shui Rui. Shui Rui ignored Jiang Mia's fiery gaze and walked to Yushu's side. He took off his cloak and wrapped it around her. He put one hand on her shoulder and said in a gentle manner, "It's my fault for not thinking things through and startling you." Yushu patted the back of his hand to show that she was fine. Lu Shining. Jiang Mia was angered by their intimate actions. She slammed the table and stood up. However, Lone Swan, who was behind her, pressed down on her shoulder and made her sit back down. She had never suffered such humiliation before. She turned her head and angrily said, "Dog slave, do you dare to fight with me outside? See if I don't chop off your dog claws." Lone Swan looked down at her and said, "You're not my opponent." Even if he let her use one hand, she wouldn't be able to beat him. "Pei, you were the one who sneak attacked me from behind. If you have the ability, then let go of me and fight again." This time, Lone Swan didn't pay any attention to her. However, the way he looked at her was clearly saying, "Defeated opponent." Jiang Mia was furious. She hated the fact that she was under someone else's control and she couldn't beat this bastard. The more she thought about it, the angrier she got. She turned to look at Shui Rui and Yu Shu. She was so angry that she laughed and questioned them. "One of you is a minister of a fallen country, and the other is a general of an enemy country. How dare you have an illicit relationship in private? Aren't you afraid that you'll be cursed by the whole world if this matter is spread out?" Shui Rui and Yu Shu looked at each other. They could see no fear and no regret in each other's eyes. Shui Rui said with a serious expression, "Princess Royal did not attend tonight's celebration banquet. She must be unaware of Her Majesty's golden words. The previous dynasty's celestial commissioner mentioned that Yu Shu has the talent to govern the country. As long as she is willing to submit to the great Yen, she will be treated with courtesy and let bygones be bygones." Upon hearing this, Yu Shu's eyes flickered. With the same serious expression, she said, "As long as His Majesty the Emperor of the Great Yen promises not to kill Emperor Chongjin, I'm willing to submit to him." Both of them echoed each other, completely disregarding Jiang Mia's threat. Both of them wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder in front of the world. How could they not have a plan for the future? You. Jiang Mia's eyes turned red with anger. She pointed her finger at them and scolded, "Blame me for being blind and not seeing through the relationship between you two." Yu Shu didn't like to hear this. She squinted at her, sneered and said, "You have no right to tell us what the relationship between us is. Princess trespassed into the barracks and set fire in the middle of the night. I caught you red-handed. You don't know how to repent and keep pestering me. Do you think you can get away with this?" Shui Rui could vaguely guess that the reason why Jiang Mia was absent from the palace banquet tonight and sneaked into the barracks was not just to set fire to the barracks. He asked with a stern voice, "Why did you come here tonight?" Jiang Mia didn't bother to cover up. "It's a dark and windy night. Why do you think I came here to set fire to the barracks?" Yu Shu didn't complain, but she admitted that she came here to set fire to the barracks. As for who she wanted to kill, it was self-evident. Yu Shu suddenly felt the palm on her shoulder sink, and when she raised her head to look, she saw Shui Rui's expression was gloomy. His handsome features were suffused with a vicious aura, his eyes were faintly suffused with a red light, and his entire body seethed with a baleful aura, causing him to actually seem like a black-faced god that was extremely shocking. She didn't know that a person who had been on the battlefield for a long time, his hands were stained with blood, and he was used to seeing dead people. It was inevitable that he would be infected with killing intent. Once he was angry, he would kill anyone who stood in his way. How many people knew that Princess sneaked into the barracks? Who was the accomplice? The angrier Shui Rui got, the calmer he became. "No one knew. I just wanted to kill someone. I don't need any help," Jiang Mia said frankly. She was confident that they could not do anything to her. That's right. As the eldest princess of Great Yen Dynasty, if she wanted to kill a minister of a fallen dynasty, even if the minister died, no one would dare to make her pay with her life. Moreover, she had failed, but she was still alive. Shui Rui lowered his head and asked Yu Shu, "Who else saw her?" Yu Shu thought for a moment and answered, "At that time, everyone was fighting the fire, so no one noticed that I had captured her. Only my two serving ladies and Gu Hong, my man of sacrifice." She only mentioned Gu Hong's identity. She wasn't sure if Shui Rui was denying that Gu Hong was the sword-bearer who followed Zhu Muzhao that night in Ascending Cloud Temple. "That means apart from you no one has seen her. That makes things easier." Shui Rui nodded his head, spun and walked to a weapon rack in the corner. He picked up a heavy sword and pulled it out from the scabbard. Inside the tent, both Yu Shu and Jiang Mia were confused by his action. Just when they thought it was strange, they saw Shui Rui stride towards Jiang Mia with the sword in his hand. He swung the sword and was about to chop off Jiang Mia's head. "Wait!" Yu Shu cried out hastily. But her voice was not as fast as Shui Rui's sword. In just a split second, the blade of the sword had reached her neck, and a terrified face was reflected on the surface of the sword. Jiang Mia's mind went blank. Her mouth was wide open, but she couldn't make any sound. Her eyes were filled with the cold expression of Shui Rui as he swung the sword at her. A final thought flashed across her mind. Why did he want to kill her? Clang. At the moment of life and death, Lone Swan actually blocked it. Shui Rui's sword chopped down on his arm guard, causing the ground to tremble. Lone Swan's expression changed slightly. He didn't dare to be careless and immediately retreated. His other hand picked up Jiang Mia, who had narrowly escaped death, and quickly dodged to the corner of the tent. His arm moved and the steel arm guard broke into two halves and fell to the ground. It could be seen that Shui Rui had great strength. If that sword had landed on Jiang Mia's neck, her head would have fallen to the ground on the spot. Seeing this, Yushu hurriedly rushed forward and grabbed onto Shui Rui's arm, holding him back. Although she was angry that Jiang Mia tried to assassinate her in the middle of the night, she never thought of killing her. Big brother, don't. Quickly stop. After their reunion, they had been together for more than half a month. Why didn't she notice that his temper had become so bad? When he was impulsive, it could cause one's liver to tremble. Jiang Mia leaned on Lone Swan's body, and her legs went soft. Her face was ashen, and there was no longer the indifference she had before. Her eyes reddened and she asked in a daze, "You want to kill me?" She thought that they had known each other for 9 years, going through trials and tribulations together. Even if he didn't have any feelings for her, he would still have some feelings for her. In the end, it was all wishful thinking on her part. Shui Rui failed to kill her, but his expression didn't change as he said, "In my heart, Shu is already my wife. Since you have the intention to kill her, how can I spare you? Even if I didn't succeed today, I can't guarantee that you won't do it again in the future. You have nothing to fear just because you are a princess. If I don't get rid of you, there will be endless troubles in the future. Why don't you give me a reason not to kill you?" No one knew how many nightmares he had when he and Shu were separated for 5 years. He dreamed that she was trapped in the capital and died in this cage, unable to wait for him to pick her up. He cut through all the obstacles just to be by her side one day earlier. After going through so many hardships, he finally got what he wanted. Anyone who tried to stop him would be his enemy. Jiang Huaya's face was pale. Looking at Shui Rui's eyes, it was as if she had just recognized him today. "If I die, my royal brother will not let you off. No one will think that I will kill you." Shui Rui was extremely calm. He raised his sword and pointed it at her. "After tonight, the eldest princess will disappear and the fire in the camp outside the city was done by a spy to steal military secrets. These two matters are unrelated." Hearing this, Jiang Hua's hair stood up. She could no longer lie to herself that Shui Rui had any feelings for her. He wasn't trying to scare her, he really wanted her life. Of course Jiang Hua was afraid of death. Her willfulness was only because she had someone to rely on, not because she didn't have a brain. Now that death was near, she finally knew fear. She didn't want to die here and let this dog and dog couple take advantage of her. She awkwardly retreated and stepped on a foot. When she turned around and saw Lone Swan, she suddenly remembered that he had just saved her. Thinking about how his martial arts were strong and how he could appear and disappear unpredictably, she suddenly had an idea and grabbed his arm. Gritting her teeth, she said, You escort this princess out of this place. When I safely return to the palace, I will reward you with 1,000 taels of gold." However, Lone Swan coldly looked at her and thought, this stupid woman must have misunderstood something. If he hadn't heard his master stop him, he wouldn't have cared if she was dead or alive. "You think 1,000 taels of gold is too little?" Jiang Hua grabbed his arm and refused to let go, like she was grabbing onto a life-saving straw. All right. I'll have my royal brother make you an official and give you a mansion and beauties. If you have any other requests, I'll agree to them all." Lone Swan did not move and looked at Yushu with impatience in his eyes. Yushu knew that she shouldn't laugh at this moment, but Jiang Hua's silly look amused her. She chuckled and couldn't help but tease, "Princess, instead of begging him, why don't you beg me? As long as you lower your head and admit your mistake, I will consider sparing you." Jiang Hua hated Yushu to the core. How could she lower her head and admit her mistake? She might as well die. Shui Rui was still holding his sword. He turned around and looked at Yushu with an indescribable expression. "When did you learn to be soft-hearted? Even if you forgive her today, will she forgive you in the future?" Seeing him stubbornly insisting on killing Jiang Qia, disregarding the consequences, Yushu couldn't help but feel very happy in her heart. However, she couldn't really watch him kill Jiang Hua, the emperor's younger sister, in a moment of impulse. She stretched out her hand and pressed it on Shui Rui's wrist that was holding the sword. She gently pressed it down and looked him in the eye, silently stopping him. The anger in his eyes didn't diminish, but he still followed her will and lowered his sword, wanting to see what she would do. I haven't died yet, but you're already so angry. What if I really die in her hands? What will you do then? Shui Rui replied without hesitation, I will first kill her to avenge you, then meet you in the underworld. Without her in this world, what meaning was there in living? Yu Shu unconsciously used the great insight technique and stared at him for a moment. Suddenly, she smiled brightly and turned her head to say to Jiang Hua, you saw and heard everything. You want to kill me, so he will definitely avenge me. Unless you kill both of us, you won't be able to escape death. Let me ask you, what kind of deep hatred do we have for each other to fight to the death? Jiang Hua was originally bold and confident. From her point of view, she had already determined that Shui Rui would be her future son-in-law. Who would have thought that Yu Shu would appear out of nowhere and ruin her plans? Of course it was Yu Shu's fault. She was angry and wanted to kill Yu Shu to vent her hatred. However, when Yu Shu seriously asked about it, she couldn't bring herself to say it. What kind of deep hatred was it to steal someone's love? If she said it out loud, it would make her seem petty. When she saw Jiang Mia's conflicted expression, Yu Shu put away her smile and went to ask Shui Rui for the sword in his hand. Under his deep gaze, she carried the heavy sword with both hands and walked over to Jiang Mia before she passed the hilt of the sword forward and said, I know you like him, but I like him even more than you do. If I can't be with him for the rest of my life, glory, splendor, wealth, and fame are useless to me. So I'll give you a chance. You can kill the two of us now to prevent him from seeking revenge in the future. Otherwise, please be magnanimous and let us go so that our lovers can finally be together. She didn't see Shui Rui's suddenly burning gaze behind her, nor did she see the gentleness on his lips. However, Jiang Hua, who was in front of her, could see that dazzling smile. Do you think I don't dare? Jiang Hua gripped the hilt of the sword with a gloomy expression. As long as she used a little more strength to stab forward, Yu Shu would be unable to escape death. However, Shui Rui, who was standing not far away, didn't move at all. He didn't stop her, as if he was prepared to die together with her. Yu Shu let go of her hand, allowing Jiang Hua to point the sword at her heart. She didn't care whether she would live or die in the next moment. She turned around and locked eyes with Shui Rui. The two of them only had eyes for each other and nothing else. Damn it. Clang. Jiang Hua forcefully threw the sword on the ground and scolded in a low voice, Isn't he just a stinky man? Do you think I can't live without him? If you want to die together, then go jump into the lake, go drown yourself, or go take poison. Gu Hong was startled by her sudden craziness, so he took a few more glances at her. He inadvertently discovered a trace of moisture at the corner of her red eyes, making him feel a little awkward. Yu Shu didn't get angry after being scolded by her. She asked with a smile, Does Princess still want to kill me? I won't kill her, I won't kill her. Jiang Qia glared at her angrily before glaring at Shui Rui. She said sarcastically, This princess's words carry enormous weight. If someone were to kill her one day, you better not wrongly accuse me. Although her words were unpleasant to hear, they were the truth. Yu Shu finally relaxed. She walked to Shui Rui's side and persuaded him in a low voice. He hesitated for a moment, but in the end he listened to her and said to Jiang Hua, I will let you off this time. If there is a next time, I will definitely not be lenient. After saying that, he hugged Yu Shu and left, leaving Jiang Hua and Gu Hong staring at each other. Since there's nothing else, I will be leaving. Jiang Hua was putting on a brave front, but in reality she was secretly relieved. There was a wave of lingering fear in her heart, and her head was spinning. She just wanted to leave this godforsaken place as soon as possible. Lone Swan silently grabbed her collar and pulled her back. Io? Why are you grabbing onto me? Let go of me. Master didn't say anything, so you can't leave. Are you blind? Can't you see that the two of them have left? Hurry up and let go of this princess. Believe it or not, I will get someone to cut you into pieces and feed you to the dogs? Chapter 822. Shui Rui had thought of a way to cover up the fire at night in the camp outside the city. It did not cause much of a stir, and no one knew that the eldest princess had visited the camp at night. Jiang Shaoxing felt that he had lost face this time. He had almost lost his life instead of killing someone, so he kept his mouth shut. She was rude and unreasonable, but her words still counted. When Yu Shu had handed the sword to her, she had not attacked. After this, she would not yell at Yu Shu to kill her. Even if she still had resentment in her heart, she would only vent it elsewhere. The next morning, Shui Rui arranged for a grand carriage to personally escort Yu Shu back to the capital. He first rested for a while in the Dinghua Hall, then accompanied her to the palace to meet the emperor. The Yan emperor summoned them alone in the Hall of Calm Peace. "Your Majesty, I have not failed in my mission and have persuaded Lady Yu to submit to the court. I have come to pay my respects." The Yan emperor nodded, and he silently sized up the tall woman that followed behind Shui Rui. He noticed that she wore a plain green robe, her jet black hair was tied up neatly behind her head, and she didn't wear any makeup or hairpins. Her complexion was too white, and she seemed sickly and weak, causing it to be difficult to discern her age. The most special thing wasn't the line of cinnabar between her brows, but the gaze she looked at him with. It was so calm and composed that it exceeded his expectations. "Lady Yu, do you know that by submitting to the Yan you will have to be loyal to me? As my subject you will have to abandon the previous court. Are you willing?" He had heard of this girl's name when he was far away in Liaodong. Seeing her today just based on her bearing, she lived up to her reputation. Yu Shu had not knelt since she entered. Hearing this, she raised her head, straightened her back, and looked at the Yan emperor without fear. She said in a tone that was neither servile nor overbearing, "I have a condition. I hope your Majesty will personally agree to it." "Shu, don't be presumptuous," Shui Rui shouted. "No problem." The Yan emperor waved his hand at him and looked with interest at Yu Shu. "What conditions do you want me to agree to? Speak." She called herself a sinful official and addressed him as His Majesty. It was clear that she was speaking to him with the status of an official of the previous imperial court. She was really bold. "Your Majesty, please promise not to harm my an emperor's life at any time. I will ensure that he dies of old age and lives in peace for the rest of his life." Yu Shu's actions were not superfluous. The Yan emperor had ordered Emperor Chongzhen to be imprisoned and had not killed him. But the reason he had not killed him now was mostly to appease the people and show his benevolence. It did not mean that he would not kill him in secret in the future. Leaving the previous emperor alive would always be a disaster. How could he allow someone else to sleep beside his bed? The day Emperor Chongzhen lost his usefulness would be the day he died. She wanted this promise to give Emperor Chongzhen a life-saving talisman. As long as she was alive, he would never have to worry about his life. After all, they were a monarch and an official. This was the last thing she could do for Da-en as the celestial commissioner of the Yin dynasty. Otherwise she would have a guilty conscience. Moreover, she had promised Empress Jiang that she would give them a chance to reunite in her lifetime. "This condition of yours really puts me in a difficult position." The Yan emperor shook his head and laughed. He was not angry because Yu Shu's request showed her loyalty and proved that she was not a greedy person. But he did not promise her immediately because he knew very well what her condition represented. He was considering whether she was worthy of his promise. Yu Shu saw his hesitation and decisively threw out a temptation. "If your Majesty agrees, I will not only swear loyalty to the Yan kingdom, but I am also willing to offer a rare treasure." The Yan emperor raised his eyebrows and was interested in the second half of her sentence. He asked, "What is a rare treasure?" "One of the 6 founding weapons of Da-en, the Chunjun sword." The Yan emperor was stunned and then widened his eyes. He turned to look at Shui Rui and asked with his eyes, "Isn't it said that the 6 founding weapons of Da-en were lost long ago?" Shui Rui's eyes were very innocent. "I don't know." "Ahem." The Yan emperor cleared his throat and put on a dignified face. "As far as I know, the 6 founding weapons of the previous dynasty disappeared many years ago. How could they appear in your hands? Tell me the truth. Don't hide anything." Yu Shu lowered her head and answered. She told a story. "This is what happened. About 300 years ago, Empress Ningzhen passed away. Emperor Anwu had a secret decree to bury the 6 founding weapons with her and bury them in the depths of the imperial mausoleum. Who would have thought that after 200 years, a rebellious prince would appear in the court? He eloped with a female general and broke into the imperial mausoleum. They mistakenly entered Empress Ningzhen's tomb and destroyed half of the 6 founding weapons and stole the other half. Among them was the noble and unparalleled Chunjun sword. Later, after several changes, the Chunjun sword ended up in the Dragon Tiger Mountain sect. After many twists and turns, it finally returned to the Celestial Commissioner a few years ago. When I took over the Celestial Commissioner, the former Great Supervisor handed this unparalleled sword to me for safekeeping." The Emperor of Yen and Shui Rui glanced at each other. They were doubtful of her words. The only thing that was worth affirming was that she dared to take out the Chunjun sword as a bargaining chip to convince him. It was enough to show that she definitely knew the secret of the 6 founding weapons. The Yin Emperor was quite moved. He couldn't hide his curiosity and asked her, "What is the use of this Chunjun sword? It can be called a national weapon?" Yu Shu smiled indifferently and said in a proud tone, "Among the people of Da'en, there are few people who have not heard of the epic legend of Emperor Xingzu opening up the mountains and rivers. But there is also a secret rumor that Emperor Xingzu could seize the world in one fell swoop because of the power of the 6 founding weapons. Of these 6 weapons, one is a book, one is a sword, one is a ruler, one is a tripod, one is a rui, and one is a compass. All of them are powerful and omnipotent." With the death of Empress Ning Zhen, the 6 founding weapons became a cloud of fog. After 300 years, there were not many people left in this world who could even call out their full names. The descendants of Emperor Anwu disobeyed the ancestral teachings and took out the Book of Mystery Fairy Lu Ren from the Imperial Mausoleum. They tampered with its content and added an article on the back of it called, "The Essentials of Governing a State," and another strange art called, "The Divine Lesson of Tai Gu." The Book of Mystery Fairy Lu Ren was the one that could destroy everything. The 7-star ruler was the one that moved the stars. The Tai Ching cauldron was the one that integrated wisdom. The stone rui was the one that turned calamities into blessings. The Fushi compass was the one that guarded the mountains and rivers. This was the content of the Book of Mystery Fairy Lu Ren that Yu Shu had seen with her own eyes. There were only a few sentences, but they covered the power of the 6 founding weapons. It was shocking. The reason why the Chunjun sword is known as the founding weapon of a nation is that, apart from being a godly weapon itself, it also has an unknown use. Yu Shu paused and looked up at the emperor again. The Yan emperor pricked up his ears and listened attentively. She was at the crucial point, but she refused to continue. He urged, "Go on." Yu Shu shook her head lightly. There was a smile in her eyes. She reminded him calmly, "Your Majesty, this concerns the secret of the Yin dynasty's 300 years of peace and prosperity. If I divulge it to you, wouldn't I be a traitor for glory?" Hearing her soft words, the Yin emperor was so angry that he laughed. He stretched out a finger and pointed at her head. He turned around and said to Shui Rui, who was pretending to be deaf and dumb, "Listen, listen. She is forcing me to agree to her condition first. You tell me, should I do as she wishes?" Shui Rui turned his head to look at Yu Shu and shook his head helplessly at the Yin emperor. He said, "Her temper has always been unruly. She does whatever she wants. Don't blame her. If you want me to say it, why don't you agree to her first and listen to what she has to say? If she has substance in her words, then it's fine. If she is deceiving you, you don't have to keep your promise. At that time I will share the crime with her." How could the Yin emperor not hear the protectiveness in his words? He snorted and said, "There is no reason to go back on what I have promised." As he said this, he raised his chin at Yu Shu and said in a strong voice, "I promise you that I will spare Lu Tan's life." There was a strange light in Yu Shu's eyes. She immediately put away her arrogant attitude. She took a deep breath and knelt down. Her hands were above her head as she bowed deeply to the ground. She exclaimed, "My emperor is wise. I, Yu Shu, swear my loyalty to you. If I go against this, I will be struck by lightning and die without a complete corpse." The Yin emperor smiled in satisfaction. To be able to subdue such a rare talent for his own use, he had to say that he felt a sense of accomplishment. This was because Yu Shu had not been subservient to him at the start. Her previous aloofness and conceit made her submission at this moment seem much more valuable. "Very good, stand up and speak." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Yu Shu stood up slowly. She smoothed her clothes with one hand and tidied up her demeanor briefly. Then she lowered her head and said respectfully, "Just now, when we talked about the other use of the Chunjun sword, we had to mention another weapon that founded the nation, the Book of Mystic Nyu Lu Ren. The greatest secret of the 6 weapons for founding a nation was hidden in the Book of Fairy 6 Rens. But she would not really tell it to the Yin emperor. Her identity as the person who broke her life should become a thing of the past with the fall of the Yin dynasty and disappear in the long river of history. The Book of Fairy 6 is the head of the 6 weapons. It is not an exaggeration to say that it is a heavenly book. Back then, Empress Ningxuan grasped the Book of Fairy 6 and knew everything in the world. Nothing could hide from her eyes. Using the Book of Fairy 6, she could predict the future and look back at the past. That was a true celestial ability, a miracle that should not exist in the human world. She was the best at weaving lies. It was not the first time that she had deceived the emperor. However, when things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. Empress Ningxuan repeatedly peeped into the secrets of heaven and finally incurred the wrath of heaven. Although she was the mother of the world and was deeply loved by Emperor Anwu, her children died prematurely one after another. She had no descendants and died prematurely in her youth. It was indeed recorded in the history books that Empress Ningxuan had given birth to 2 sons and a daughter. but none of the children lived past the age of 5. In the end, the one who succeeded to the throne of Emperor Anwu was a prince born by an unknown concubine. So after Empress Ningxin died, Emperor Anwu was heartbroken and buried the 6 weapons with her. It was to avoid thinking of her and also to prevent future generations from misusing the country's weapons and incurring misfortune. But in order to stabilize the country, every time a new emperor ascended the throne, there would be a great teacher who would enter the depths of the imperial mausoleum to open an altar and worship the ancestors. He would use the Book of Fairy 6 Wrens to divine the fate of the country and thus continue the peace and prosperity. Truth and falsehood, truth and falsehood. Even she did not know why Emperor Anwu had agreed to bury the 6 weapons with Empress Ningxin. Was it guilt or fear? He probably did not expect that future generations would go against his will and take the Book of Fairy 6 Wrens without permission. The Book of Mystic Fairy 6 Wrens, the Emperor of Yen muttered silently. These few words seemed to have a magic power that tempted the desire in his heart, causing him to blurt out without thinking, "Where is this thing now? Was it stolen by that prince back then or was it destroyed?" Of course, he hoped that such a treasure had not been destroyed. If he could borrow its power, he would not have to worry about his country not being able to be passed down from generation to generation. Unfortunately, it was lost. But it was not stolen by that prince but for another reason. Yushu shook her head and sighed. There was a trace of imperceptible bitterness in her voice. Because of its loss, the Celestial Commissioner was unable to fulfill her duty and was unable to predict that 100 years later, an earth-shattering supreme like you would appear. This sentence did not seem like a compliment, but it amused the Yen Emperor. He looked at her more and more pleasing to the eye. Shui Rui's gaze moved around Yushu's body as well, and he felt both happy and sad in his heart. His Shu had already transformed from a girl who was loyal to her emotions into a woman who was wise and persevering. He could imagine what she had gone through all these years, and he hated himself for not being able to protect her as she grew up. The Chunjun sword was lost 100 years ago, and the Book of Fairy Women was stolen about 30 years ago, during the Baotai period. Yushu stated, according to Juda, the thief who stole the Book of Fairy Women must have something to do with the prince who defected 100 years ago. But the other party appeared and disappeared mysteriously. After he succeeded, he seemed to have disappeared from the world, so there was no way to catch him. Over the years, the Celestial Commissioner has been secretly searching for the whereabouts of the Book of Fairy Women. But it was not until 5 years ago that there was a new clue. The Yen Emperor pondered for a moment and suddenly continued her words. The clue you mentioned, is it the Chunjun sword? Yushu looked up at the Emperor with a complicated expression and smiled bitterly. Your Majesty guessed it. Yes, if you want to know the whereabouts of the Book of Fairy Women, you have to find clues from the Chunjun sword. Only then did the Yen Emperor realize what it meant that Yushu was willing to offer the Chunjun sword. Thinking of this, he could not help but breathe a little faster, and his heart beat faster and faster. So he closed his eyes slightly, leaned back in the chair behind him, relaxed his hands and feet, slowed down his breathing and calmly considered for a while, so as not to be controlled by his emotions. When he opened his eyes again, he had made up his mind. He looked at Yushu and said, I want to reappoint you as the Celestial Commissioner and promise you a high position and a generous salary. Are you willing to track down and find the Book of Fairy Women for me? For the stability of his kingdom, he was determined to get this thing. Without changing her expression, Yushu said, I am not 100% sure that I can find the Book of Fairy Women. The Yen Emperor heard the intention in her words and laughed loudly. As long as you try your best, if you can't find it in 3 to 5 years, then you can find it in 8 to 10 years. With this sentence, the deadline was relaxed. It was equivalent to saying that even if she could not find it, she would not be punished. In other words, as long as she did not find the Book of Fairy Women, the Yen Emperor would not abandon her for another day. Yushu had finally achieved her goal, so without further ado, she immediately agreed, Your Majesty, Your Majesty. The Yen Emperor was in a good mood. After seeing Yushu today, not only did he know the secret of the 6 implements of the Yin dynasty, but he also gained something else. So before they left, he called the eunuch in and drafted a decree on the spot, reinstating the Celestial Commissioner and appointing Yushu as the Great Commissioner. She was given back her power according to the old system of the previous dynasty and was temporarily made a first-rank official. While he was drafting the edict, the Emperor of Yen asked Yushu curiously, I heard from official Yu that you are a disciple of an immortal and can summon the wind and rain. Is that true? Yushu laughed involuntarily. Most of the rumors among the people are exaggerated. However, I have indeed been apprenticed to an old immortal as my master. Thanks to his enlightenment, I am slightly more intelligent than ordinary people. Oh? Then what skills do you have? Yushu smiled and the cinnabar between her brows suddenly appeared. She only said 6 words: no fortune and misfortune, judge life and death. The Yen Emperor was not an expert in the study of Yi, so he did not know the prowess of these 6 words. His expression was still perplexed. Shui Rui took a step forward and explained, ever since the founding of the Yin dynasty, the study of Yi has been prevalent. In the past 300 years, it is unknown how many outstanding people have appeared. However, there are not more than 3 people in the imperial court who are able to truly achieve the 6 words no fortune and misfortune, judge life and death. It can be said to be a rare occurrence in 100 years. For example, Empress Ning Zhen, or Qingyang Yi, who appeared for a brief moment 60 years ago. When he finished, he turned to look at Yushu with surprise in his eyes. He asked in disbelief, when did you reach this stage? He actually did not know. Yushu also turned her head to look at him and said to him with a smile that was not a smile, what was your identity before and what was my identity? Why should I tell you? What she meant was that before today they were not on the same path. Shui Rui was rendered speechless by her words. Ha! The Yen Emperor heard them and thought that they were both interesting. He paid more attention to Yushu, the new minister. He immediately thought of another person and changed the topic. I don't know much about the study of Yi, but the Yen Kingdom has a national advisor who can predict things like a god. Do you know who he is? Yushu nodded and said, he should be King Ping's father. Then you should also know of his other identity. To tell you the truth, we originally intended for him to be in charge of the imperial astronomer. He paused, looked at her expression and then said with a smile, but since we have promised you, we cannot go back on our word. Yushu bowed her head and thanked him. She did not say anything to be modest. Shui Rui had already told her that now that the Yin dynasty had been destroyed, Yun Hua's wish had been fulfilled, and he had the intention to live in seclusion in the mountains. Moreover, he had a deep prejudice against the imperial astronomer. Even if she offered him the position of great supervisor, he would definitely not accept it. At dusk, Yushu and Shui Rui walked out of the imperial palace under the cover of dusk, and their footsteps were unprecedentedly relaxed, and they'd never been so steady. In just half a day it felt like a lifetime had passed. They had worked together to put on a good show in front of the emperor. They had successfully deceived the sky above their heads. Shui Rui helped her into the carriage with one hand and followed them in. The curtain was lowered, covering their smiles and hands that were holding each other's hands. Shu, where are you going? Home. What about me? I'll go with you. Chapter 823. Yushu had been the celestial commissioner for 5 years. She had amassed a lot of money from the business of Wangji building alone. In addition to the gifts she received during the holidays, she had quietly accumulated an amazing family property. However, after all these years she still lived in the old house on Baochang Street with her younger brother, Yu Xiu and Zhao Hui's family. Your Highness, we have arrived. Shui Rui and Yushu got off the carriage one after another. The door of the Yu mansion was closed. The plaque of the aristocratic family hanging high above the door had not been cleaned for many days and was covered with a thin layer of dust. As a result, it lost its imposing manner. The front door was even more desolate, without the slightest trace of the bustling scene of the past. Shui Rui asked the accompanying bodyguards to open the door. He looked at the plaque above his head and recalled the past. He couldn't help but sigh, using your own strength to become an aristocratic family. Ah Shu, you are really amazing. Yushu walked to his side and stood with her hands behind her back. My aristocratic family is indeed the first in the world. Since the founding of the country by Emperor Anwu, many aristocratic families had fought for power, and all of them had laid the foundation for decades or even hundreds of years. She alone supported the name of an aristocratic family. There was no one in the past and no one in the future. Fortune was sought amidst danger. Everything she possessed today was obtained after experiencing numerous life and death situations. While they were talking, the door of the Yu mansion was opened. The gatekeeper, Old Lu, poked his head out to take a look. When he saw Yushu standing in front of the door, he was stunned for a moment. Then he shouted in surprise and ran inside to report the news. At his age he ran faster than a rabbit. He's back. Our master is back. Yushu shook her head and laughed. She said to Shui Rui, let's go in first and talk. Old Lu ran so fast that everyone in the garden could hear him. Yushu and Shui Rui walked to the entrance of the cave in the backyard. Behind them, there was already a group of servants who heard the news and came out. All of them had tears in their eyes. Seeing that their master had returned home in one piece and not sacrificed herself for the country like the rumors said, they were so excited that they forgot the rules and crowded around her as they walked inside. Yushu did not chase them away. From afar she saw a group of people rushing over from the other end of the corridor. The one in the lead was Yushio. Like a gust of wind, he ran towards her and hugged her, knocking her back. Shui Rui supported her from behind. "Sister." Yushio hugged her tightly and said in a choked voice, I thought you already?" Yushu patted his shoulder and raised her hand to touch his head. Unknowingly, her little brother had actually grown taller than her. She swallowed the lump in her throat and teased him, "How old are you already? Why are you still crying? Quickly let go, do you want to strangle me to death?" Yushio hurriedly let go of her and quickly rubbed the corner of his eyes. When he looked up, he saw the man standing behind her. The familiar face made him instantly stunned. Shue, he stuttered and could not say a word. At this time, Zhao Hui, Aunt Chui and the others also caught up and surrounded Yushu, laughing and crying. "It's good that you're all right, it's good that you're all right. Amitabha, may the heavens protect you. My daughter, you've really suffered this time. Quickly call your mother to take a look." The maidservants of the North Palace were also looking at her with tears in their eyes. Yushu could not move her feet. She could not bear to see people cry. Their tears made her dizzy and she could not stop them. So, she had no choice but to pull Shui Rui out to divert everyone's attention. "Don't cry. I'm fine, aren't I? There are guests here. Let me introduce, this is His Highness, Prince Ping of the Great Yin Dynasty. It's all because of him that I can come back safely this time." Only then did the whole family turn their eyes to Shui Rui. Zhao Hui exclaimed and covered her mouth. Those who recognized Shui Rui were shocked. Wasn't he young Master Shui? How did he become a prince of the Great Yin Dynasty? "Brother Shui." Yushio finally came to his senses and called out. Shui Rui's expression remained unchanged as if it was the first time they met. Facing Yushu and a few elders he said politely, "I'm Lu Shining. I met official Yu not long ago, and I heard that she has a sworn brother who looks very similar to me. I think you've mistaken me for someone else." Everyone was skeptical. There were indeed people who looked alike in the world, but there were not so many coincidences under the heaven, and Yushu happened to bump into them. Furthermore, the same thing had happened before. Both Yushio and Zhao Hui clearly remembered that before they came to the capital city, the eldest young master of the Shui family had stayed in Yang City under the alias of Chao Zixin. Perhaps, this real Prince Ping in front of them was actually Shui Rui? Looking at their expressions, Yushu knew that they were still doubtful, so she smiled and said, "Not to mention them, even I've mistaken you for someone else." She did not explain further after saying that. Yushio, Zhao Hui, and the others could not question her in front of others, so they could only play dumb with her. They first invited His Highness King Ping to move to a small seat in the living room, so that they could reunite and discuss further. As it was not good to let the guests sit around, He Fangji accompanied Shui Rui to the living room in the front yard to drink tea. In the past few years, as Yushu's status rose, the whole family had met many high-ranking officials and nobles. At this time, when a prince of the Yin dynasty suddenly came, He Fangji was surprised, but he was not afraid. When Yushu returned to the backyard, the group of servants behind her were sent away by her chief maid, Yun Do, with a straight face, leaving only 2 personal servants to serve her. Due to the summer heat, when she came out from the palace, she felt sticky as if she was sweating. After washing up and changing into a clean dress, she sat on the couch and talked to her family. Without waiting for them to ask, she briefly told them what happened in the past half a month. "That day, I led the army out of the city to rescue the emperor, but unfortunately it was too late. The emperor had already been captured, so I had to surrender. King Ping imprisoned me in the military camp outside the city, but he did not treat me harshly. Instead, he tried to persuade me to surrender to the Yin dynasty. I refused at first, but he did not force me. But later, news kept coming from the capital. After the Yin emperor entered the capital, he reorganized the imperial army, rehired the old officials, and at the same time, he appeased the people and granted amnesty. The dynasty changed, the country changed, and the Yin dynasty has become a vanquished country. I was disheartened, and since I could not be loyal, I had to take a step back to protect my family, so I had no choice but to give in. Thanks to King Ping's help, I can return home." In front of her family, she could not tell the truth, but she did not want to use the same method she used to deal with the emperor to fool them with loyalty and righteousness. Mistress Chui heard half of what he said and covered her heart with her hand, muttering, "Thank the heavens and thank the earth. Fortunately, you're smart this time. Who cares who the emperor is? It's not as important as your life. If you're really muddle-headed and want to be a loyal official, our whole family can forget about living. Zhao Hui let out a long sigh and her face was full of lingering fear. You have no idea how many people tried to escape after the news of the Yan army invading the capital. But they couldn't even get out of the city gates. All the officials were captured and we didn't know where to look for you. The assistant minister's residence next door was in chaos, and that night, Assistant Minister Zhou was captured and locked in the prison. He was gone for 7 or 8 days and there was no news. Madame Zhou begged but there was no way out. Her tears washed her face every day, and it could be heard through the wall. Who would have thought that after another 2 days, Assistant Minister Zhou would suddenly return? Godfather and Godmother ran next door to inquire about your whereabouts. Yu Xiu finally found a chance to speak. He gritted out, I don't know where that Assistant Minister Zhou heard the rumor from. He said that the Emperor had been captured by the Yen, and that you were captured instead of rescuing the Emperor. He also said that you were tortured in the hands of the Yen, and vaguely said that you died for the country. This caused their family to think that she had encountered a mishap. They passed these last few days in a daze, afraid that one day the government would come to their door and tell them to go and bury the corpse. Yu Shu thought, no wonder she felt that the Fu was so lifeless when she entered, and everyone would cry when they saw her. So someone had faked the grievous news. This Assistant Minister Zhou was an official that Emperor Chongzhen had promoted after he ascended the throne, and had moved to this street afterwards. At the very most he had been her neighbor for 2 years. He was a 5th-grade official and when he stood in front of her he would have to lower his body. In her impression he was a person with a glib tongue. She was too lazy to pay attention to him. The two families did not often interact, so their relationship was average. Theoretically, 2 days ago at the banquet in the palace, Shui Rui had corrected her name under the eyes of everyone. This Assistant Minister Zhou had been in the first batch of officials to be reused. He had been present at the time and should have known that she was safe. But after the matter he did not explain it to her family, and pretended to be deaf and dumb. This was very hateful. It seemed that there were many people in the previous court who wanted her, Yu Shu, to die for the country. They hoped that when she lost power, anyone could step on her. She really wanted to see how interesting their faces would be when they learned that she had made a comeback and was once again in charge of the Celestial Commissioner. Yu Shu thought to herself. She would make a note of this first. When she had time later she would first get all the subordinates of the Celestial Commissioner out of the Supreme Court, and then expand this old residence a few rooms, opening up the next door. Sister, that Prince Ping outside, is he really not Brother Shui? Yu Xiu couldn't help but ask. Although his impression of Shui Rui in these years was blurred, he was still the elder brother that he had admired when he was young. Now that they met, it was impossible that he could not recognize him. Zhao Hui was also looking at her with her ears perked up. No. Yu Shu told them firmly, he is the Prince Ping of the Yen Lu Shining. You must not mistake him again and do not mention this again. If she wanted to marry Shui Rui, he would have to discard his previous identity and never admit it to anyone else. Otherwise, it would be ridiculous for the sworn siblings to become husband and wife today. Yu Xiu lowered his head, unable to hide his disappointment. Mistress Chui, on the other hand, did not care which Prince Ping was. Seeing that Yu Shu was safe and sound, she began to plan something else. She leaned forward and said with a bitter face, the Emperor has changed. You've reached the end of your career as a first-class official. While the assets in your hands have not been confiscated, why don't we pack up and return to our hometown in Yiyang as soon as possible? Then we can buy a few more acres of land and become a well-off family. After a few years of living a wealthy life, Aunt Chui had gotten rid of most of her bad habits, and she had learned to be smart. Looking at her sad face, Yu Shu was secretly amused. She pretended to sigh and teased her, it's too late, we can't leave. Aunt Chui was shocked. Didn't they let you go? Zhao Hui and Yu Xiu also became nervous, afraid that they had not gotten through the crisis. Yu Shu said, they did let me go, but I'm indebted to the Emperor of the Yen dynasty. I can stay in the imperial court and be reinstated. Therefore, I can't bring you back to your hometown to farm. Hearing this, the three of them were stunned. The great surprise was like a golden brick falling from the sky, knocking them unconscious. Aunt Chui swallowed. Does this mean that the new emperor wants you to be a high-ranking official? Seeing Yu Shu nodding, her face flushed with excitement. If she could stay in the capital, she would not want to leave. Being a landowner's old maid was not as glorious as being a lady of nobility. She thought that the good days were over, but she did not expect that the good fortune was still waiting for her. Zhao Hui and Yu Xiu were also very happy. It was not that they coveted the wealth, but they were reluctant to leave this place that could shelter them from the wind and rain. Both Zhao Hui and Yu Xiu had lived a stable life since they moved into this house. Compared to the unbearable memories of Yang City, this place was more like their home. Although they were excited, they felt a little unreal. Zhao Hui and Aunt Shui were fine, but Yu Xiu was, after all, an educated young man. Although he did not have the ambition to serve his country, he was sensible. He looked at his elder sister and said hesitantly, "Sister, you used to be a high-ranking official in the imperial court. Now that your country has fallen, you've turned your allegiance to the Yan dynasty. If the world knows about this, won't. He bit his lips and could not finish his words. Won't they scold me for being greedy for power? Yu Xiu said it on his behalf. She chuckled, reached her hand across the tea table and patted on his hard shoulder. Just you wait and see, in the future will there be more people scolding me or will there be more people who respect me? In the evening, Shui Rui naturally stayed in the Yu mansion for dinner. But because of his status, in order to prevent the whole family from feeling uncomfortable, Yu Xiu and him set up a table of dishes and wine in the eternal spring garden, and asked the others to leave so that they could have a good conversation. The eternal spring garden was like spring all year round. It was warm in the winter and cool in the summer. During this season there were many flowers and plants, and the scenery was very beautiful. Right now they were in an octagonal pavilion next to the pond. Under their feet were tiles paved with white jade, and above their heads was a dome decorated with gold crystals. Glazed lamps hung high under the eaves, reflecting the glow of the people in the pavilion, making them look like immortals who had descended to the mortal world for a stroll. This garden of yours when I left looked a little simple and crude. It's a pity, but today it's like I'm in a fairyland. Shui Rui couldn't help but praise. A cool breeze blew from the riverbank with a faint fragrance of flowers, intoxicating people before they even drank. Later it was repaired a few times and a stream of running water was brought in from underground. Yu Xiu smiled as she drank. After the banquet I'll take you for a night tour. It just so happens that a few of the beauties under the moon that I'm growing are about to bloom, and I'll enjoy them with you. Very good. Shui Rui's interest was aroused by her. He felt that he hadn't been so carefree for a long time. Ever since he went to Ningdong City, he hadn't had a moment of leisure. Going between the military camp and the battlefield, he didn't talk about elegant things. After they ate and drank to their heart's content, Yu Xiu asked someone to bring a bamboo lantern over, and she passed it to Shui Rui to carry before the two of them walked arm in arm towards the veranda. All along the way they walked and stopped to admire the flowers and the moon, and they were extremely uncomfortable. When the night was deep, in the waterside greenhouse on a reclining chair, he half-hugged her from behind, tilting his head to look at the two blooming clusters of white moonlight under the window-sill, quietly savoring the peace of this moment. The Emperor has already agreed to marry the two of us. You should pick an auspicious day as soon as possible. I don't want to sneak around with you anymore. Yu Xiu gave an end sound and then chuckled. She turned her head and poked his chest. Then you have to go to Wang Jilu to take the notice first. On the auspicious day when Wang Jilu's great exchange hall had opened, Yu Xiu had ordered people to post a sky-high reward on the Tianji list. Up until now, the first place was still her son-in-law search golden invitation. Shui Rui had long known that she had rebuilt Wang Jilu into a great exchange hall. Her reputation had spread all these years, and with Jin Ku, the god of information, it wasn't hard to know that there was a Tianji list in Wang Jilu. He had also heard that there was a reward worth 10,000 taels of gold there, but no one had been able to take it. He lowered his head and saw her mischievous expression. His heart palpitated and he hugged her tightly, saying, "I am so lucky to have met you in this life." If it wasn't for her appearance, he would have been burdened by the Shui family's upbringing and the blood feud between his adoptive father and birth mother. He probably wouldn't be able to escape for the rest of his life. It was laughable. He was a dignified man, but he actually relied on a woman like her. Even if the two places were separated and they didn't see each other for days, as long as he thought of her, he would become fearless. He wouldn't be afraid of the dangers ahead, wouldn't be afraid of blades and spears being blind. Because he firmly believed that even if he had nothing, even if his name didn't exist, she would still wait for him to return to her side. Chapter 824. The next day Shui Rui accompanied Yu Xiu to the Supreme Court. Even though he had half-coaxed and half-scared a group of officials to go home, there were still many important officials of the previous dynasty imprisoned here, such as Duke Jing and Count Zhong and Yong. Which one of them wasn't a person of high status and power in the past? Now that they were prisoners, they didn't even have a chance to turn around. Shui Rui could give Guo Huaiyan and the others a way out because of their old relationship, but he would not easily let go of these people who had thrown stones at the Shui family when they were in trouble and Yushu was in trouble. In the prison, the Celestial Commissioner and dozens of officials had been imprisoned for more than 10 days. No one was allowed to visit them and they could not hear any news from the outside. They only knew that a while ago, some people had been released one after another and had submitted to the new dynasty. From the day they came in, they had been holding their breath. Even if their hearts were trembling and they became more anxious every day, but until the last step, no one dared to disobey Yushu's orders. Even if the country had changed hands without news of her, without knowing whether she was dead or alive, no one dared to make a decision. In the few years that woman had been in power, her methods were unyielding, even more than the previous Rinda. She had cleaned up the 12 prestigious families in the 12 prefectures. Now the high-ranking officials left behind by the Celestial Commissioner all followed her lead. Even if there were people who had disloyal thoughts, they had to think about the consequences of betraying her. If she was lucky enough to escape this time when she made a comeback, they would only be worse off than they were now. As a result, when the country was about to be destroyed, the Celestial Commissioner became the hardest bone. In the eyes of the old officials who had already escaped, wasn't it just Yushu's fierceness? Wang Yi, this way the people are all locked up in front. In the lifeless prison cell, the sound of a person's voice was exceptionally clear. As a series of footsteps approached, the Yi officials locked in the cell all pricked up their ears and looked in the direction of the approaching person. Their hearts were filled with fear, afraid that it was someone who came to ask for punishment. It was broad daylight outside, and the light from the skylight shone on the narrow corridor. When they clearly saw the two figures walking side by side in the middle of the corridor, they could not help but stare blankly and get up from the ground. They had seen King Ping of the Yen Kingdom before. It was not that they did not suspect that he was the eldest son of the Shui family, who had been missing for many years. His appearance was very similar, but no one dared to say it out loud. But now, what made them dumbfounded was the finely dressed girl who walked beside him and scathed. "Tao Tai Shu," someone cried out excitedly. When Xiaoan was the first to rush to the cell door. When he saw the appearance of Yushu, he almost cried tears of joy. Everyone knew that he was the most obedient subordinate under her, and many people mocked him behind his back, saying that he was a vicious dog in front of her door. But who knew that if he did not follow a master like her with his family background, he would never be able to make a name for himself in this life? How could he become the Shaoqing of the Taiqing department at such a young age? Since he had received her kindness, it did not matter if he was called a dog by others. "It's great that you are safe and sound." Yushu nodded to him comfortingly. She glanced around at her subordinates in the surrounding cells. Looking at their sallow and emaciated faces and shackled faces, she knew that they had suffered a lot this time, but they were able to hold on until she appeared. It was very rare. "You have suffered a lot. I will bring you out now." Then she nodded to Shui Rui and signaled the jailer to open the cell door and let them out. Good news fell from the sky. The Celestial Commissioner and her subordinates did not expect that she would release them as soon as she appeared. They were immediately surprised and felt that their savior had come. They had not clenched their teeth and endured these days in vain. "Taishu, are you going to let us go home?" Yushu looked straight ahead, folded her hands on her abdomen, and announced with a dignified expression, "The previous dynasty has passed and the Yen dynasty has replaced it. This is the mandate of heaven. I am honored by the call of the current emperor, and now I am willing to submit to the current dynasty and resume the position of the Great Commissioner. Are you willing to follow me to revive the Celestial Commissioner, to assist the current emperor, and to benefit the people of the world?" Everyone was shocked again. They looked at each other and did not know what to do. If this had happened half a month ago, they would have been in a dilemma. However, it was said that those who went out earlier had all been reinstated. Now that Yushu had spoken, if they didn't agree, would this group of officials who had lost their country die for their country? "I would rather follow the Taishu." "Me too." The first to respond were Wen Xiao and Xanya. Wen Xiao and was not a big deal, but Xanya was the most cunning one among the Celestial Commissioner's subordinates. After Yushu came to power, even the highly respected Chao Zuoling was uprooted by her. Only he was still sitting in the position of the left judge, unmoved. In the corner, Ren Qiming sighed softly. He looked at Yushu's calm expression and knew that An dynasty was doomed. She could not protect the sacred ancestors' empire, but she could protect the Celestial Commissioner. He did not know if it was a blessing or a misfortune. "We will follow the Taishu's orders." Ren Qiming could not help but think. If Zhu Gong's spirit is in heaven, will he regret handing the celestial commissioner to her? Seeing that the chiefs and adjutants of the 3 departments and 2 bureaus had nodded, the rest of the people did not hesitate anymore. They all bowed and responded to her call. Just like this, Yu Shu easily recruited a group of officials to work for her again. It was obvious that if these people wanted to establish a foothold in the new dynasty, they would have to rely on her. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly as she raised her hand. Dispense with the formalities. Shui Rui stood behind her with his hands behind his back and waited for her to show her grace. Then he walked forward and said with a straight face, "You should be glad that official Yu pleaded for you. Otherwise there would not be such a good thing. Not only was you pardoned, you were also restored to your positions. You should really go out and ask how many princes, dukes and marquises are still in this prison waiting to be dealt with." Everyone felt guilty and afraid after hearing his words. They were in awe of Yu Shu, but also felt an indescribable sense of gratitude. After that, Shui Rui released all the people in these cells, and he registered them before handing them over to Yu Shu. There were a few other female officials that were locked up at other places, and she personally made a trip there as well to bring them out. The women who could become the Celestial Commissioner were naturally not ordinary weak women. Madame Elvi and Situ Qinglan were the best among them. They were more patient than the men. Finally, when Yu Shu appeared, they did not cry or make a fuss. They chose to follow her without a word. The next day, the 2 seals on the door of the Celestial Commissioner building were removed and people were restored. The news that Yu Shu was back in charge of the Celestial Commissioner building spread like wildfire and shocked everyone in the court. However, no one dared to criticize her or point a single word at her. Firstly, on the day when the Yen army invaded the capital city, everyone knew that Yu Shu had bravely saved the emperor. Secondly, during the celebration banquet in the palace, King Ping had cleared her name in front of everyone. Even the Emperor of Yen had personally praised her character. Whoever wanted to scold her for being treacherous had to look at themselves in the mirror first. At the same time, the war in the north subsided and a large number of refugees poured into Zijing Pass. However, there was not much food in the national treasury and it was unable to provide disaster relief. King Ping's faction advocated allocating food for disaster relief first and at the same time, dispatching troops to the south to collect food. This could also wipe out the remnants of the previous dynasty in one go. The other faction opposed the waste of food and suggested that the refugees should be driven to the south to reduce the pressure on the national treasury. Both sides insisted on their views and were in a stalemate. To put it bluntly, the national treasury was empty and there was no money. A group of people wanted to rob while a group of people wanted to save. Just when the Emperor of Yen was in a mess because of their quarrel, there was a turning point. The Celestial Commissioner building, led by Yu Shu, donated 1,000,000 taels of silver to fill the national treasury. The aristocratic families of the 12 prefectures in the capital responded. Those who had money and those who had food donated food. In just a few days, more than 5,000,000 taels of silver and 300,000 don of food were raised. It was considered to have solved the urgent problem of the imperial court. The Emperor of Yen was overjoyed and immediately issued a decree to allocate food for disaster relief. On the other hand, he issued a letter of enlistment and appointed an imperial envoy and a general to go to the south to collect food and enlist people along the way. This time, Yu Shu took the lead in donating money and food and earned a good impression in front of the emperor. After that, she was praised in the court for her deep sense of righteousness and even asked the historian to note it down for her. The aristocratic families of the 12 prefectures, who were forced to bleed but did not get any benefits, could only pinch their noses and accept it. They treated it as spending money to avoid the disaster. No matter how many people were scolding her behind her back, Yu Shu still did what she wanted. From her point of view, these entangled aristocratic families of Yi were one of the root causes of the decadence of the previous dynasty. Because of the existence of the Celestial Commissioner, they abused their privileges and amassed wealth without limit. They were rich but heartless, standing between the imperial court and the people. However, they did not benefit either the country or the people. As time passed, they became the country's parasites. When the Great Yen was founded, it was not like the previous dynasty that advocated e-learning. In addition to her interference, the emperor paid attention to her, not the Celestial Commissioner. This caused those aristocratic families of e-learning to lose their support and foundation. They could no longer plunder the people's wealth unscrupulously. Sooner or later, the aristocratic families of e-learning would fade out of the sight of the imperial court and go into decline. Yu Shu did not think that what she did was wrong. There was a reason for the popularity of e-learning 300 years ago, and there was also a reason for the decline of e-learning 300 years later. When things reach an extreme, they will move in the opposite direction. When the flourishing reaches the extreme, it will decline. Chapter 825. Yushu had only been in the imperial study for an hour when the Empress Dowager somehow got the message and sent her chief palace maid to Tian Hall to ask for Yushu. Reporting to the emperor, the Empress Dowager was just about to summon Yu Dai into the palace. Coincidentally, she heard that Yushu was here and sent Nubi to deliver the message. Yushu sat on the chair bestowed by the emperor, her hand holding a cup of herbal tea, pretending to be deaf and mute. It was a great taboo for the inner palace to pry into the affairs of the previous court. But the Emperor of Yen was filial and didn't mind Empress Dowager Wei's transgression. "Oh? What does Muhu want to see official Yu for?" the Emperor of Yen asked curiously. He was a bit worried that Jiang Qia hadn't given up. The Empress Dowager was desperate for her daughter and couldn't do anything to Shui Rui, so she had turned to Yushu. Reporting to the Emperor, the Empress Dowager must be summoning Yu Da for advice on the matter of choosing a consort in the inner palace. The Emperor of Yen made a sound and turned his head to say to Yushu, "If that's the case, go to the inner palace and listen to the Empress Dowager's orders." Yushu finally stood and said, "This subject will leave first." She wasn't afraid of Empress Dowager Wei finding fault and leisurely followed behind the palace maids. It hadn't even been 2 months since the Yen moved the capital to Jing. The inner palace was empty. There was only Empress Dowager Wei and Jiang Qia, mother and daughter. There wasn't even a high-ranking consort. When the Emperor of Yen was in Ningdong City, he had a few concubines but none of them were favored. After entering Jing, he was bestowed a beauty without a word and lived in a side hall. Empress Dowager Wei was the woman with the highest status in the inner palace. Of course, she lived in the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. Yushu was a frequent visitor to the back palace. She had seen many women in the palace, no matter if it was noble consort Shui who had been favored the most in the 6 palaces, or Empress Rui who was scheming, or Empress Xia Jiang who had captured the emperor's heart, or Rui Shu Fei who thought she was clever. Putting aside personal grievances, she had a trace of sympathy for these women who had bloomed and then withered. Empress Dowager Wei was an exception. She hadn't experienced the struggle for favor or the fight for the throne. She had used her son's hard work to obtain this honor. To be able to raise a founding emperor, this in itself showed her ability. So even if she didn't know the dirty tricks of the Hogong, she definitely wasn't a woman to be trifled with. Yushu set a position for Empress Dowager Wei in her heart. When she entered the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, her expression didn't change. She was brought in front of Empress Dowager Wei and respectfully gave a full bow. This subject Yushu kowtows in salute to the Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager Wei reclined on the couch and swept a glance at her. She didn't make it difficult for her and called out, "Grant me a seat." As early as 5 or 6 years ago, the two had met once. It was interesting. That time it was also to choose a Fei for the Yen Emperor. But last time it was a Wang Fei, this time it was a Ho Fei. Yushu took 2 steps back and sat down. She put her hands flat on her knees and looked straight ahead. She did not raise her head to look at the Empress Dowager who was sitting on the seat. No one could find anything wrong with her every move. In reality, in terms of the rules of the palace, even Empress Dowager Wei didn't know as much as she did. "Ijia called you over to ask you to advise the emperor on how to choose a Fei. As you can see, the Hogong is such a large place, but only Ijia and my daughter live here. It is pitifully cold. The emperor has been busy with the affairs of the country these years and has never had any interest in women. Even now he doesn't have an heir. Ijia cannot sit and do nothing. It is time to hold a general election to expand the Yen Hogong. More importantly, it is to choose a satisfactory empress for the emperor." Yushu thought about how the Yen emperor hadn't said much when he heard about the Fei selection in the imperial study. She knew that while he wasn't enthusiastic, he wasn't against it. She responded, "Nyang Nyang, don't worry. When this subject returns today, I will make arrangements and order the Kunling Bureau and the Ministry of Rights to handle this matter." The emperor's Fei selection had always been handled by the joint efforts of the Kunling Bureau and the Ministry of Rights. Yushu, as the Celestial Commissioner, only needed one word from her and there would naturally be people who would do their best. But Empress Dowager Wei furrowed her brow and said in displeasure, "Ijia wants you to personally handle it. This is the first Fei selection after the emperor ascended to the throne. How can there be any carelessness? Ijia will say the ugly things first. If you fail this time, Ijia will hold you accountable." Seeing the situation, Yushu could see that the Empress Dowager was taking the chance to make things difficult for her. She stood and said, "This subject receives the Empress's decree." Empress Dowager Wei looked at her and didn't show any dissatisfaction. She was very calm. She had called Yu Shu over not just for the face election, but also to see this Qing Yaojin that had come out of nowhere to steal her dragon son-in-law. She understood that a forced melon wouldn't be sweet, but no one could stop her as a mother from venting for her daughter. Empress Dowager Wei smirked coldly inside and gave a look to Qin Momo, who was standing at the door. She heard a report come from outside. The palace bureau has sent a few new palace servants to serve. Does Empress Dowager want to take a look? Tell them to come in. Empress Dowager Wei nodded. She had someone bring tea for Yu Shu, not in a rush to let her leave. After a while there was a summons from outside the hall. The Momo guarding the door led in a few slim palace maids. In total there were 8 of them. After 2 steps they all knelt down in greeting, their heads lowered, not daring to look around. Empress Dowager Wei examined them, but couldn't tell if she was satisfied or dissatisfied. Qin Momo came forward to explain. These were originally from the palace. Last time they weren't willing to leave, so they stayed. Luckily they understand the rules, so they were sent here first. Empress Dowager Wei said, "Ijia doesn't need so many people here. Since they aren't willing to leave the palace, then arrange another place for them to go." As she spoke, she seemed to have a sudden impulse. She casually nodded and ordered, "The 2 on the left, send them to Marquis Cheng En Fu. The 2 on the right, send them to General Dai's Fu. As to the 4 in the middle, send them together to Ping Wang Fu to serve." Yu Shu hadn't even looked at the palace maids on the ground. Hearing this, she turned to look at Empress Dowager Wei. Coincidentally, she also looked over. She smiled at Yu Shu and teased, "It's lucky that you are a woman. Otherwise you could have taken 2 back. These beauties, only men know how to be protective of the fairer sex." Yu Shu pressed up the corners of her lips in a smile that wasn't a smile. It was impossible to see any emotion on her face. Empress Dowager Wei knew that she had an engagement with Shui Rui, but still provoked her like this. These beauties were Empress Dowager Wei's way of showing off her authority. This tactic wasn't brilliant, but it disgusted people and made her unhappy. "Take them away. Clean and dress them and send them out of the palace." Since the Empress Dowager had spoken, those palace maids couldn't even say no. They obediently gave their thanks and bowed as they retreated. From beginning to end, Yu Shu didn't look at them once and missed the resentful eyes that one of them had raised her head to look at her. "Ajia is tired. You should also leave the palace. Don't forget what I told you. Quickly draft the rules." Empress Dowager Wei's goal was achieved. She closed her eyes and leaned back on the pillow, too lazy to say anything else. Yu Shu bid farewell in a low voice and quietly left the palace. When she reached the outside of the Palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, she turned her head and saw the group of palace maids that hadn't gone far. She turned and slowly walked on the palace path with her hands behind her back, thinking inside. She knew Empress Dowager Wei wasn't easy to provoke, but the Empress Dowager didn't know that she wasn't easy to provoke. When Shui Rui took the initiative to hand over the military power, the Emperor of Yen not only conferred him the title of prince, but also gave him the position of Minister of the Ministry of Personnel and the Grand Secretary of the Hall of Literary Glory. He was in charge of editing the Great Yen Code. A series of titles fell on his head as if they didn't cost anything. His Highness King Ping deserved to be the #1 favorite of the emperor, causing a group of people in the court to be envious, jealous, and hateful. There was also another group of people who tried their best to curry favor with him, hoping to be able to rely on him and enjoy the shade under his big tree. Those officials who were good at currying favor asked around about King Ping's preferences, hoping to cater to his preferences. It was rumored that His Highness King Ping liked to drink wine. Some people gave him the fine wine that they had collected for many years, and some even gave him the recipe for making wine. Rumor had it that His Highness King Ping was not interested in women, but some people did not believe it. If he was not interested in women, then it must be because he was not attractive enough. Anling City had no shortage of beautiful women of all kinds, and there must be one that could move King Ping's heart of stone. Shui Rui's King Ping's mansion was still under repair, so he was temporarily staying at the Steadwave mansion. The main entrance was completely surrounded by the carriages that came with gifts, causing him to be annoyed to the point that he directly summoned the newly appointed commander of the Golden Guards to reprimand him. As a result, the entrance of the Steadwave mansion became quiet the next day. If anyone blocked the entrance again, they would be captured and interrogated by the patrolling guards in the city. At dusk on this day, Shui Rui brought along a thick pile of files as he returned to the Steadwave Hall. The revision of the laws was imminent, and fortunately the previous dynasty already had a perfect code that he could use as a reference. Otherwise, if he had to spend 8 to 10 years on it, then he wouldn't take on such a difficult task. It was the end of summer and the weather was much cooler at night. The iceberg in the study was removed, leaving behind a big blue and white fish tank. The water hibiscus in the tank bloomed and wilted, and the green leaf bed produced small and exquisite lotus heads that looked like they were carved out of jade. Shui Rui had just taken a shower. He was bare-chested and only wore a pair of mid-length pants as he lay on the deck chair. He played with the Mujiang fan that Yushu gave him in his hand. He usually kept it in the fan's sheath and brought it with him wherever he went. Even after all these years, the fan was still 90% new. Only the amethyst pendant hanging on his head shone brightly after he rubbed it. This Mujiang fan was made from 100-year-old peach tree root. It was indeed a treasure that could ward off evil. He fought on the battlefield and killed countless souls, but he did not lose his mind because of it. Not a single wrong soul or evil spirit dared to disturb him in his dreams. It was mostly because he always carried this fan with him. After a short rest, Uncle Gue was reporting on some miscellaneous matters outside a screen. He picked the most important ones first. That was right. After Shui Rui returned to the capital, as soon as he settled down, he went to the Southern Woods lumber shop to fetch Uncle Gue back and let this loyal old servant take care of the house on his behalf. Uncle Gue had been looking forward to Shui Rui's safe return, so there was no reason for him to refuse. Shui Rui thought long-term. He and Yushu were both important officials of the court. In the future, after they got married, they would have to live together. He had to arrange at least 2 trustworthy servants to take care of the affairs of the estate for them. Otherwise, if he had to ask them to take care of every little thing, it would be hard for him to live in peace. He chose Uncle Gue, and Yushu would choose another person. The 2 sides would keep each other in check to prevent one person from becoming the strongest. It was a very safe plan. Uncle Gue specially put the 4 beauties bestowed by the Empress Dowager at the end. He saw the figure lying on the screen suddenly sit up straight. He could imagine the annoyance on his Prince Yu's face. He had been on guard day and night, but in the end he couldn't prevent it. If this matter reached Miss Yu's ears, she might be very angry. Uncle Gue shook his head in his heart. All those years ago, Shui Rui had no choice but to flee, and he'd only asked Yushu to bring him a message and a violet jade bat. He could only stay in the capital to guard his master's belongings and the future mistress of the clan. So he'd taken Yushu to be his mistress since a long time ago, and he knew how difficult it had been for her in these past few years, so he was biased towards her in his heart. Send them back to where they were sent from. Shui Rui was in a bad mood. He was waiting for the emperor to bestow a marriage, so why was the Empress Dowager messing around? Uncle Gue helplessly persuaded, those are the people bestowed by the Empress Dowager. Do you want to defy the decree? This old servant has already sent them to the side compound, they won't be an eyesore. When the Wang Fu has been repaired, we can move there and leave them here, is that alright? He didn't know that this Dinghua Hall was the territory that Shui Rui had taken in order to gain Yushu's favor. He was preparing to give it to her as a betrothal gift. Leaving those women behind, wasn't that like turtles taking over a magpie's nest? This is bad. Shui Rui lay back down once again and folded the Mujiang fan in his hand leaf by leaf, then he slowly said, send someone to find out which family the Empress Dowager has sent people to. Divide these palace maids equally and send them to them as well. Say that it's the Empress Dowager's grace, and this prince has presented Buddha with borrowed flowers. The Empress Dowager had sent these palace maids not purely to sow discord between him and Ashu, but to test his bottom line. If he accepted them to keep the peace, it was tantamount to submitting to the Empress Dowager's authority and helping her grow. If he took a step back today, in the future she might force him to take 10 steps back, 100 steps back. He respected the Empress Dowager as the emperor's birth mother. It was fine if they could live in harmony, but if the Empress Dowager took things too far and stretched her hand into the court, he wouldn't be able to tolerate it. Uncle Gue had watched Shui Rui grow up from a young age and understood his temper too well. He looked like a well-mannered person, but in reality he hid a rebellious streak. In the past, there had been old Master Shui above his head that didn't let him do anything. Now that he had leaped over the dragon's gate, who could stop him? Ai, this old servant will go arrange it now. Uncle Gue swallowed the words back into his stomach and turned to go to the front yard. He sent 2 spies out to investigate. In the time it took to eat a meal, he came back. It turned out that other than sending people to Dingbo Hall, the Empress Dowager had also sent people to the Marquis of Qing'en and General Dai's Fu. This Marquis of Qing'en, Wei Shihan, was Empress Dowager's cousin. After the Yen Emperor proclaimed himself emperor in Ningdong City, he had been one of the first officials of the previous court to actively respond. He had just been a Qianhu in Suzhou. Due to the Empress Dowager's nepotism, he had received some military service in the troubled times. This person wasn't good at fighting, but his luck was very good. If it wasn't that the Empress Dowager's paternal family didn't have anyone to support, he wouldn't have had the chance to bask in her glory. As to old General Dai, he was the brother of the old Dong Jing Wang in the past. In front of the emperor he could call himself an elder. It was often said that a tiger father wouldn't have a dog son. Old General Dai's son was also a fierce general. This person's personality was forthright. His age was a few years older than Shui Rui, and they had some friendship. That night, Uncle Gui arranged for the 4 palace maids to stay in the guest room. The next morning he had them freshen up and prepare to send them away. These pitiful beauties, who had dreamed of flying to the top of the tree and turning into phoenixes last night, only realized that something was wrong when they were sent to the back door of Dingbo Hall and sat in the horse carriage. They immediately cried and threw a tantrum, refusing to leave. How many of these women who came from the palace were really stupid? If they stayed here, they would still be palace maids bestowed by the Empress Dowager and could put on airs. Once they left this door, they would become women that King Ping didn't want and would really become playthings. We are all under the Empress Dowager's orders to leave the palace to serve His Highness. You've eaten the guts of a leopard. Hurry and let us off the carriage. Aren't you afraid that if word gets out, His Highness King Ping will be implicated? One of the women had a veil over her face and was shouting outside the carriage while the other 3 were crying. When Uncle Gui heard it, he walked to the side of the carriage with a sullen face and said, "You people who came from the palace don't even know the difference between superiors and inferiors. Is His Highness someone that servants like you can casually talk about? Whoever says another word of nonsense will have their tongues cut off to prevent others from gossiping and ruining the Empress Dowager's virtue." The crying in the carriage stopped abruptly. Only the palace maid who stood up for them refused to stop. She said in a fierce manner, "I want to see His Highness. Otherwise I'd rather bite my tongue and commit suicide right now. Let's see how you're going to explain this to the Empress Dowager." Uncle Gui did not expect there to be a thorn in the side. If it was any other occasion he would have praised her for having a backbone. However, if she really had a backbone, she would have committed suicide by biting her tongue long ago when they were sent out of the palace. She had waited until now to put on a show. It was all because she coveted the glory and splendor of their highness that she was reluctant to leave. "Then you can end it here," Uncle Gui choked her and turned to order the servants. "Come, prepare a mat, we'll collect the corpse later." Just as he finished speaking, there was a dong sound from inside the carriage as if someone had crashed into it. Immediately after, there was a scream, "Nyang nyang, nyang nyang don't." Uncle Gui suddenly turned his head. He was not deaf, he had just heard someone shout, "Nyang nyang." He quickly ordered the guards to open the carriage door. He saw the situation inside. A palace maid was hugging another, fainted and crying loudly. He moved closer to listen. Wasn't it Nyang Nyang? This matter was not a joke. Uncle Gui did not dare to be negligent and immediately sent the women in the carriage back through the back door. After a round of interrogation, the truth was revealed. It turned out that this Nyang Nyang, who had fainted, was a concubine in the harem of the previous dynasty's Emperor Chongzhen. This matter was not a small matter. Uncle Gui hurriedly sent someone to Donghua Gate to report to Shui Rui, asking him to return to the Fu to make a decision. At the same time, an imperial edict arrived at the gates of Dinghua Hall. Accompanying it was the celestial commissioner who had been ordered to announce the edict. Today, Yushu had gone out riding a large horse and had specially changed into a purplish-red brocade robe. She wore a crane feather crown on her neck and a pair of green silk boots on her feet. The flame between her brows had been carefully painted with cinnabar. Her 2 sword-like eyebrows slanted to her temples. She was not as delicate and charming as a woman, but was 100 times more beautiful than a man. Behind her were 2 teams of guards with swords. They swaggered through the streets and stood in formation in front of the gates of Dinghua Hall. Those who did not know would think that she had come to pick a fight. Chapter 826. Yushu walked into Dinghua Mansion with the imperial edict in hand. Uncle Gui kindly welcomed her into the hall and looked outside. He saw 2 rows of black-robed cold-faced guards patrolling outside and then guarding the front and back doors, leaving 2 guards behind to protect Yushu. Even their prince did not have such an imposing manner. Speaking of which, if it was someone else, they would not dare to be so arrogant in King Ping's territory. Yushu and Uncle Gui were old acquaintances. but they pretended not to know each other in front of others. Uncle Gue had just sent the few beauties rewarded by the palace back to the backyard. When he turned to see Yushu, he felt guilty. He put on a flattering smile, but in his heart, he felt bitter. He was afraid that she had heard about the Empress Dowager gifting beauties and specially came to ask for an explanation. "Thank you, Lady Yu, for coming personally. I have already sent someone to invite His Highness back to the residence. I estimate that he will only be back in an hour. Do you want to sit here and rest or take a stroll by the lake? Dinghua Mansion's scenery is excellent." Yushu raised the imperial edict in her hand and said, "There's no need to trouble yourself. I will wait here for King Ping to return." Uncle Gue had to stay behind to accompany the guest nervously. He wanted to find out what the emperor's imperial edict was. Shui Rui had been staying in Wenhua Hall to preside over the revision of the new laws for the past few days. He was busy leaving early and returning late every day. Seeing that he had time today, he showed up at the library in the morning. Without changing his clothes, he brought a group of guards and prepared to go to North City Street. He wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to reveal the reward notice for a son-in-law on the Wangji Tower's Qianji list to avoid trouble. Who would have thought that when he left Donghua Gate, he would be intercepted by people from Dinghua Mansion? In detail, among the few beauties rewarded by the palace yesterday, one of them was a concubine from the previous dynasty. Shui Rui's expression changed when he heard this. He was not scared but angry. The person was rewarded by the Empress Dowager. He did not believe that the Empress Dowager did not know about it. When the Yan Emperor entered the imperial palace, he had ordered all the concubines of Emperor Chongzhen to be locked up in the cold palace. If this one was not released, could she have escaped by herself? But the Empress Dowager purposely sent the concubines of the previous dynasty to his door as palace maids. What was her motive? Was he trying to sow discord between him and the Yan Emperor, or was he trying to frame him? Let's go back and take a look. Thereupon he had no choice but to turn around and return to the Dinghua Hall. He had to first settle the trouble the Empress Dowager threw at him, so that in the future he would not stir up a fishy smell, which would spread to his sweetheart's ears and cause her to misunderstand. Because he had taken the main road back, Shui Rui had missed the messenger that Uncle Gue had sent. It was not until he saw the black-robed guard standing guard outside the Dinghua Hall and Yushu's carriage that he knew that she had come. Shui Rui could not help thinking too much. Ever since she was reinstated, in order to avoid arousing suspicion, she did not take the initiative to visit him. Yesterday the Empress Dowager had just sent several women over, and today she came. Thinking was thinking too much, but he did not feel guilty. He dismounted from the horse, tidied up his clothes and strode inside. A clever manservant at the door jogged forward to lead the way. He reported in a small voice, "Yuda has been here for almost an hour. She is sitting in the Tingsong house in the front courtyard." Shui Rui did not ask any more questions. His footsteps quickened and in the blink of an eye, he had arrived at the guest hall. The black-robed guards outside the door bowed their heads in greeting. He swept his gaze over them and couldn't help muttering to himself. In the blink of an eye, he saw Yushu sitting quietly inside the room. His eyes lit up and he couldn't help raising the corner of his mouth. His cloudy expression turned sunny. "Why did you come without saying a word?" There was a saying that a day apart was like 3 autumns. At this moment, Shui Rui only had her beautiful figure in his eyes. How could he see Uncle Gue secretly winking at him? Yushu used her sleeve to conceal the golden imperial edict. There was a faint smile on the corner of her mouth. She examined him and said, "I came to congratulate Wang Yi." Shui Rui's eyelids twitched. He hesitantly asked, "Why did you congratulate me?" Yushu asked him in reply, "What does Wang Yi think is a happy event?" This. Shui Rui glanced at Uncle Gue and saw that Uncle Gue was frowning and lightly shaking his head at him. Unfortunately, he did not understand what she meant, so he could only follow her words and guess. "Could it be that you are referring to the Empress Dowager sending a few people to me yesterday?" Yushu's face instantly turned cold. "So you think that is a happy event?" Shui Rui knew that he had said the wrong thing and immediately denied. "How can this be considered a happy event? Yesterday I already said to have Uncle Gue send the people away. If you don't believe me, you can ask him." It was a pity that he was the awe-inspiring King Ping in court, but in front of her, he did not have the slightest bit of grandeur. Uncle Gue was also afraid that Yushu would turn against him and quickly testified, "It is true, it is true. Wang Yi ordered this old servant to send the people away yesterday." "Did you send the people away?" Unexpectedly, the master and servant duo could not answer. Yushu raised her eyebrows. From the beginning she did not take those palace maids seriously. If she did not have the slightest confidence in Shui Rui, why did she wait for him for 5 years? With her understanding of Shui Rui, he would not fall for the Empress Dowager's trick. Then why did he not send the people away? It was worth thinking about. So you are saying that the people are still here? She put the imperial edict into her sleeve as she stood up and walked towards the door. Lead the way. I want to see what kind of beauty the Empress Dowager sent that made Wang Yi reluctant to send her away. Shui Rui listened to her mockery and shook his head with a bitter smile. He followed her, not caring about the black-robed guards behind him. He gently held a corner of her sleeve and lowered his head to her ear to say, "There is a problem with the people the Empress Dowager sent. It is not good to cause more trouble. Come, I will tell you clearly." Yushu was not angry. She glanced at him and waved her hand to signal the black-robed guards behind her to wait. He held her sleeve and walked forward. The two walked side by side down the long corridor. After turning a corner, Shui Rui opened his mouth to tell her the whole story. Yesterday the Empress Dowager sent 4 people. She said that they were maids in the palace. This morning, when Uncle Gui sent them away, he found that one of them was the concubine of the previous dynasty's Emperor Chongzhen. Hiss, Yushu frowned and said, "What does the Empress Dowager want to do?" She was the same as Shui Rui. The first thing she thought of was a conspiracy. Shui Rui shook his head and said, "I just came back and did not have time to ask in detail. Why don't you come with me to take a look?" That's fine. The matter had its priorities, so Yushu did not argue with him anymore. Uncle Gui followed from behind at a distance and watched them reconcile. Shui Rui waved at him and he hurriedly rushed forward to lead the way. The 4 palace maids were placed in a small building in the southwest corner of the Dingbo Hall. There were guards at all 4 corners of the building. When Yushu and Shui Rui walked to the outside of the small building, they could faintly hear the sound of crying coming from inside. They looked at each other and quietly walked in. On the bed in the room, a pale but extremely beautiful woman was lying flat on the bed, her eyes staring listlessly at the top of the bed. Another palace maid was kneeling next to her bed, crying and trying to persuade her, "Your ladyship, you must hold on. Life is tough now, but compared to the future, what's the point of suffering now? Think on the bright side when you see Shui. No, King Ping, when you see him you can beg him. For the sake of our friendship in the past, he won't leave you in the lurch, right? Based on our friendship in the past, he won't leave you in the lurch." Hearing this, the woman lying on the bed finally had some reaction. She murmured, "So what if I see him? I am the Emperor's concubine. He has become the enemy general who destroyed the country. Even if he is willing to pity me and take me in, how am I going to live in the future? Don't tell me I really have to give myself to him and become a lowly concubine? But with his current status, he can have any woman he wants. How long can he take pity on me?" Outside the door, Yushu heard their conversation and turned to look at Shui Rui with a strange expression. She could tell who the ladyship was, but she was not sure if he knew. It was not easy to hide from these rotten peach blossoms. Even after so many years they still came to her. But Shui Rui could not bear to listen any longer. He was a pure man, and there was no need for the 2 women in the room to smear his reputation and turn the shadowy things into the truth. So, he raised his hand and pushed the door open, interrupting the self-pity of the women in the room. When the 2 women in the room heard the sound of the door opening, they immediately shut their mouths and looked at the screen blocking the door with a startled expression. They saw a muscular man with honey-colored skin and a handsome face. He was clad in a luxurious purple robe, which made him look noble and dignified. He was none other than Prince Ping of the Great Yan Kingdom, whom they were discussing just now. The concubine quickly sat up. Recalling what she had just said, her cheeks flushed red. She was too ashamed to show her face. She lowered her head and trembled nervously. A woman in her early 20s was the most beautiful time for a flower to bloom. She looked like a begonia after the rain, delicate and pitiful. Shui Rui looked at her carefully and finally recognized who she was. Just as he was about to say something, he heard a cold snort behind him. Yushu also came in from the door. "I didn't expect to meet honored consort Shu here. I'm really surprised." When she heard this voice that wasn't unfamiliar to her at all, Rui Zizhu instantly felt as if she'd fallen from the warmth of autumn into the coldness of winter. She hurriedly raised her head in shock, and when she clearly saw Yushu, who'd walked over to stand by Shui Rui's side, she was completely unwell. "You, why are you here?" Before this, although Rui Zizhu was the head of the 4 concubines, she had never been favored by Emperor Chongzhen. When the army of the Yan Kingdom pressed on the border, Emperor Chongzhen sent the two Empress Dowager and Empress Xiajiang to Luoyang to take refuge, but he did not allow the concubines to leave the capital. So she was trapped in the palace and witnessed the change of imperial power and the change of the ruler of the world. She still remembered that the Yan army broke through the capital gate and broke into the palace. Corpses were everywhere. She thought she was going to die, but she reunited with the person she thought she would never see again in this life. Although he refused to admit it, she was sure that she did not mistake him. He was Shui Rui, the person who almost became her husband. Although he did not recognize her, he did not kill her. Instead, he sent her to the cold palace with the palace concubines and maids, giving her a way out. She guessed that he probably remembered their old relationship. The days in the cold palace were very difficult. She gritted her teeth and endured for a whole month. It was not that she did not have a trace of hope in her heart that he would think of her and rescue her from this cage. But she did not wait for him to appear. Instead, she waited for Chief Shang, who came to the cold palace to select people. Her identity was not a secret and could not be concealed. But for some reason she was selected and left the cold palace that day. As no one mentioned her identity, she had been following a few palace maids who were selected along with her and learning the etiquette of serving the nobles. Until yesterday, when they were summoned by the Empress Dowager of Great Yan. In the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful, she saw Yu Shu, the woman she hated to the core. What Rui Zizhu could not forget was the gentleman's hibiscus banquet that year. Thousands of lotus lanterns bloomed on the lake of Dinghua Hall. A talented scholar and a beautiful woman gathered together. It should have been a song that would be sung by future generations, but it was ruined by this vicious woman. Her fate seemed to change that night. First, her reputation was ruined. Then, her marriage with the brother of the Shui family became a bubble. Her dreams came to nothing. In the end, he disappeared and she entered the palace. Fortunately, Yu Shu did not recognize her at that time. Under the order of the Empress Dowager, she was sent to Dinghua Hall. Her heart was both nervous and a trace of unspeakable joy. But she never dreamed that she would see Yu Shu here. As for Yu Shu, when she saw Rui Zizhu looking as if she had seen a ghost, she said with a smile, "I was ordered to pass the imperial edict, but I encountered something rare." A concubine of the previous dynasty ran into the backyard of the current dynasty's prince. In order to prove his innocence, Prince Ping invited me to come and find out the truth. When Emperor Chongzhen was on the throne, concubine Rui Shu took advantage of the power of the Empress Dowager to make trouble for her from time to time. Later, she was taught a lesson by Rui Shu and became obedient. Yu Shu had never been a soft-hearted person. Seeing Rui Zizhu in such a situation, she did not feel sorry for her at all. Rui Zizhu's hands were trembling. She hated and was afraid of Yu Shu. She could only pretend to be calm and said, "It was the Empress Dowager who allowed me to leave the palace and sent me here. If you have any questions, why don't you go to the palace and ask the Empress Dowager?" "So you mean that the Empress Dowager knew your identity and background, but deliberately sent you to Prince Ping as a palace maid?" Yu Shu caught her words in a few words and dragged the Empress Dowager into the trouble. Rui Zizhu had stayed in the palace for a few years after all, so she wasn't stupid to the point of being hopeless. When she heard Yu Shu's question, she didn't dare to answer. She bit her lips as she looked at Shui Rui, and her glistening eyes were filled with panic and pleading. "Now that things have come to this, I just want a place to stay. Brother Shui, I know it's you. It's fine if you don't admit it, but you and I have known each other for a long time. Are you going to watch me be forced to death by others?" Shui Rui felt wronged when Yu Shu snatched his words as soon as he entered the door. It was true that the Shui family and the Rui family almost became in-laws, but in all honesty, he had never had any improper thoughts about the young lady of the Rui family. How could she still want to rely on him with such a small relationship? "Consort Shu, right? I'm Great Yan's Lu Shining and I'll never change my name. Don't be in a hurry to seek death. Let me ask you, you claimed that the Empress Dowager allowed you to leave the palace. Does she already know that you are a concubine of the previous dynasty?" Rui Zizhu could not avoid this question. She stammered, "The Empress Dowager is high and mighty. How would I know what she is thinking?" Shui Rui looked at Yu Shu. Whether it was the truth or a lie, she would know when she heard it. Yu Shu's great insight art had been cultivated to the last level. She could see through the fabrications as she wished. As expected, Yu Shu only glanced at Rui Zizhu before turning to tell Shui Rui, "It seems that honored concubine Shu doesn't know." The meaning behind the words was, if he wanted to know what Empress Dowager Wei was selling, he wouldn't be able to get it out of Rui Zizhu's mouth. Shui Rui nodded. In a flash he had an idea. He called for someone to come and Uncle Gue walked in from the door. "What orders does Wang Yi have?" Prepare a carriage. Ben Wang will personally send this honored concubine Shu back to the imperial palace and report to the Holy One. Didn't the Empress Dowager want to test him? Then he would do as she wished and have her give up on those thoughts as soon as possible. No. Rui Ziju's face paled. She looked at Shui Rue and shook her head. I don't want to go back to the palace. I beg you, don't send me back. Shui Rue didn't seem to hear her and turned to leave, not caring about their past relationship. Seeing this, Rue Ziju didn't care that Yushu was present. She threw off the blanket and jumped off the bed. Barefooted, she leapt behind him. Before she fell, she grabbed a corner of his clothes. Raising her head, tears fell from the corner of her eyes. Her beautiful face was so fragile it made people's hearts wrench. If I go back to the palace, I will only die. How can the cold palace hold a living person? Are you really so cruel? Big brother Shui, I would rather stay by your side and be a Yahuan that brings you tea and water, serve you for the rest of my life. I beg you, save me, alright? Shui Rue slightly furrowed his brows. It wasn't good to kick her away. He never acted against women. But how would he fall for this trick of hers? If he would be soft-hearted and take in any girl who cries and begs in front of him, then from the northeast all the way to Enling, who knows how many girls he has kept by his side, who knows how many times he has let us Shu down. What a good servant girl. Honored consort Shu has really opened this seat's eyes. Yu Shu sneered and crossed her arms as she looked down at the beauty who was kneeling on the ground and begging. Seducing her man in front of her, the master, was simply courting death. Rue Ziju saw her disdainful gaze, and the old and new hatred was ignited. She glared at her with tears in her eyes and said, You Lianfeng, you shameless villain with a venomous heart. How can you have the face to stand in front of Big Brother Shui? He has been extremely benevolent to you, but you slandered the Shui family for colluding with the Yen traders, causing his entire family to bear injustice. If it weren't for your treachery, Grandpa Shui wouldn't have died unjustly, and Auntie Shui and younger sister Shui wouldn't have suffered such humiliation. How can you have the face to see him? As she spoke, she turned around with an agitated expression, and her teeth chattered as she roared at Shui Rue in a low voice. You actually don't know that she's your enemy? Why would you rather save her than save me? During the period when she was trained in the bureau of the Imperial Palace, she would occasionally hear some gossip. For example, Prince Ping had pleaded for the previous dynasty's celestial commissioner at the palace banquet. Thus, she knew that not only was Yushu not convicted, but she was also reinstated with the help of Shui Rue and could continue to enjoy her wealth and glory. She only thought that Yushu had thought of a way to confuse him, and wanted nothing more than to expose her true colors in front of him. Enemy? Ah. Yushu suddenly felt that she was pitiful. It was fine if she thought too much of herself, but how did she become delusional? She looked at Shui Rue and saw that he was also looking at her. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. There was no need for words. That day she came forward to accuse the Shui family of colluding with the enemy. One reason was to protect herself, and the other was to prevent Shui Lingnan from rebelling with Prince Xiang. That was a crime that deserved the death penalty of having his entire family executed. Later, Shui Lingnan died of illness in prison. That was his own fault. As for Madame Shui and Jin Sun's younger sister, after she had gained power, she had secretly taken them out of the nunnery and sent them to a safe place to hide from the chaos. Even if the world scolded her for being treacherous and harboring malicious intentions, she did not care. She did what she had to do. Even if there were millions of people in the world who misunderstood her, he would not. That was enough. How could you understand? She looked at Rue Ziju sympathetically and reached out to hold Shui Rue's hand, pulling him away from the place. Rue Ziju did not manage to hold on to the corner of his clothes. Her eyes were filled with their tightly interlocked fingers. She felt as if all the bones in her body had been pulled out, and she fell limply to the ground. So that's why. Yu Shu and Shui Rue left the small building and walked along the path to the garden. Only then did he remember to ask her, "What is the happy event you were talking about?" Chapter 827. In the 9th month of the first year of Zhenwu, the Emperor of Yen drafted a decree to officially change the name of Anling City to Tianjing City. The imperial palace expanded to the north and named it the Forbidden City. After the turmoil, the people in the capital city were quickly pacified by the new policies issued by the imperial court. In just 3 months, the streets and alleys regained their liveliness. Peddlers and servants reappeared in the streets, and tea houses and restaurants had people again. On the surface, everything seemed to be the same as before. However, behind the calm of the storm, something seemed to be quietly changing. On one hand, the imperial court reduced the exorbitant taxes implemented by the previous dynasty. On the other hand, it took action against the previously exempted aristocratic families of Ishua. First, it included the business tax for each Ishua hall into the law. Then it banned gambling houses, big and small, and especially prohibited Ishua masters from participating in gambling. Those who violated the law would be severely punished by stripping them of their official titles. Finally, it changed the Grand Yen examination that was held once every 3 years to once every 5 years. It also reduced the number of admission and added the court examination as a countermeasure. Many regulations had fundamentally curbed the development of Ishua, causing the prosperous aristocratic families of Ishua to go from prosperity to decline. The aristocratic families of the 12 prefectures were the first to bear the brunt. Even though they were unwilling, they were powerless to resist. The person in charge of the Celestial Commissioner was Yushu. She would not stand up for them. The current emperor did not believe in Taoism, nor did he advocate Ishua. To be honest, after the fall of the Yin dynasty, it was already a blessing in disguise that the Celestial Commissioner was able to survive. These aristocratic family heads were all speculating what methods Yushu had used to make the Emperor of Yen not use the highly respected Grand National Advisor Liu Yen. Instead, she had taken advantage of him. Seeing that Yushu had once again gained the upper hand, many people were envious. They secretly hoped that the Grand National Advisor would make a fuss. When two tigers fight, one must be injured. Who would have thought that the two of them would live in harmony and mind their own business? The first to make a fuss was not Yushu or Liu Yen but King Ping. One day in October, the Great Exchange Hall of Wangji Tower, which was located in the most prosperous area in the north of the city, opened its doors to welcome customers as usual. The front door was clean and tidy, and the plaque on the door had been washed with water before dawn. The waiters who served the customers were dressed neatly and in high spirits. They showed their white teeth and greeted everyone they met. Regular customers did not need introductions. One group went to Yuchio Hall, another group went to Being Hall, and the other group went to the Tianji list to watch the fun. Oh my god, this girl actually gave away 50,000 taels of gold when looking for a husband. Even if she married a princess, she wouldn't be able to afford it. TSK. Guests who had just arrived were shocked when they saw the red list of rewards posted at the top of the list of the Tianji list. The regular customer, who was checking the barometer by the side, turned his head and whispered to the man, "You don't sound like you're from the capital. You're from the north, right?" The person who was looking for a son-in-law was not an ordinary woman. Whoever had the ability to marry her, their entire family would ascend to heaven along with her. It's a pity that she's so arrogant that she doesn't care about ordinary people. Otherwise, the notice for son-in-law wouldn't have been up for 5 years and no one dared to take it. I've broadened my horizons today. Hey brother, tell me more in detail. The non-local young man grabbed the regular next to him to strike up a conversation. He wanted to hear more about strange people. At this time, a string of golden drums and gongs came from outside the Great E Hall. It was a noble who was on a journey and clearing the way. Not long later, a purple palanquin appeared at the entrance of the Wangji Tower. The two sides were guarded by guards in embroidered clothes and tall hats. After the palanquin landed, a man walked out. He was wearing a white magnolia robe with a cicada robe embroidered with gold and silver thread. He had a string of Husher jade pendants on his waist and a folding fan. Looking at the man's appearance, he had a high nose and a square jaw, sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He was outstanding in every aspect. Without the need for the guards to order, the guests in the hall consciously opened up a path for the noble to pass. He walked straight to the heavenly mystery list in the middle of the hall. His eyes fell on the top of the list, and his lips curled into a smile. Then, he stretched out his hand and tore down the notice that everyone was looking for a son-in-law. He took the notice. There was a burst of low exclamations and a commotion broke out in the hall. How many people present didn't know that the notice for son-in-law had been hanging at the top of the Tianji list since the day the Wangji Tower opened for business? It hadn't been moved for 5 years. Did the sun rise from the west today? They actually encountered someone taking the notice. What kind of a mortal was this master? How dare he? Lin Fu, who was greeting guests in the treasure pavilion on the second floor, heard the servant's report. He left the guests and ran downstairs. At this time, the hall was crowded and he couldn't see the situation in front of him. He squeezed out of the crowd with difficulty and covered his head with his hat. He finally saw the man standing under the Tianji list. His legs softened and he almost knelt down and kowtowed. Shui Rui held the bounty notice in his hand and rolled it into a tube before putting it away. He turned around and saw Lin Fu, who had an excited expression, and he said, "You're the manager of this place?" His other identity couldn't be revealed, so it had been a few months since he came to the capital. This was the first time Lin Fu and his group of servants had come to the Wangji Tower. How could they not be excited? Yes, 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 Lin Fu immediately responded. When he came back to his senses, he felt that he shouldn't be like this. He took a deep breath and put on a show. "This master, you took the notice of our Tianji list's notice. Did you see the requirements on the notice?" Shui Rui's eyes flashed. He took off the Mujiang fan at his waist and opened it with a whoosh. He said in a very natural and unrestrained manner, "This notice for son-in-law wants a gentleman with good facial features and a good character. He has no hidden diseases and is skilled in both the pen and the sword. His 8 characters are perfect and he has similar interests. Is that right? It just so happens that every one of mine is perfect." As he said that, he raised his hand and hooked his index finger at the back of his head. 2 guards carried a heavy box in and placed it on the ground. Once the box was opened, it blinded everyone's eyes. All the guests in the hall rubbed their eyes and looked again. They saw that the box was filled with gold ingots. "I heard that the Wangji Tower wants to take 1/10 of the reward as a reward. Here are 5,000 taels of gold. Please accept it. I will definitely take the notice. Quickly send someone to inform them." Lin Fu, who knew the truth, had cold sweat on his forehead. His 2 masters loved to play tricks. He couldn't ruin their mood, so he obediently cooperated. "May I ask for the master's name and where is his residence?" This lowly one will be able to reply. Shui Rui smiled and glanced at him. He waved his fan and turned to leave. Seeing him bend over to get on the sedan and disappear from everyone's sight, a guard who was left behind answered on his behalf, "My master is His Highness King Ping of the Yen Kingdom. Ding Bo Building awaits good news." After the master left, the Wangji Tower exploded. With so many eyes and ears listening, such a big piece of gossip would probably spread throughout the capital in no time. King Ping had taken down the notice for son-in-law of the Wangji Tower. It had to be known that the woman looking for son-in-law was the great Celestial Commissioner. Somehow, the matter of Shui Rui going to the Forgotten Machine Tower to announce the results had spread to the Emperor of Yan's ears, and he used this matter to tease the 2 of them during the morning court session. He claimed to be their matchmaker and he bestowed a marriage in front of everyone. Everyone in the court finally understood. No wonder the Grand Preceptor and the Great Commissioner couldn't fight. What kind of father-in-law and daughter-in-law would fight? When the news reached Empress Dowager Wei's ears, she was filled with anger again. A few days ago, because of the palace maid she had bestowed, Shui Rui had gone to the emperor to plead his case. He didn't care about her authority as the Empress Dowager and dragged out the concubine from the previous dynasty. In the end, the Emperor of Yen took her back and sent her back to her palace of compassionate and peaceful. Even though he didn't complain, she knew that she had made her son unhappy. Empress Dowager Wei was also helpless. She had long been dissatisfied that the emperor trusted Shui Rui too much. She couldn't persuade him openly, so she could only use this method. She knew that Rui Shu Fei and Shui Rui were old friends, but she still sent the person to him. As long as he remembered their past relationship and kept the person, she would have a way to arouse the emperor's suspicions of him. This would prevent him from being too favored by the emperor and having thoughts he shouldn't have. But Shui Rui wasn't good. He didn't keep the person and instead accused her. Facing the emperor's suspicions, she could only feign ignorance and push the blame onto that woman who secretly escaped from the palace. She looks to have some beauty. She's so bad that she was sent back. As Empress Dowager Wei locked Rui Zizhu back into the cold palace, she sent someone to the Emperor of Yen to deliver a message. Ijia is old and has the heart but not the strength to control the Emperor's Hogong. If you are filial, choose an empress as soon as possible to share the burden. Ijia can also enjoy life. Just like that, the matter passed. Empress Dowager Wei didn't get what she wanted and her mood wasn't good. Hearing that the marriage between Shui Rui and Yu Shu had been finalized, she was first worried about Jiangya. But after waiting for so many years, how could she not be sad and sad? Princess, she still hasn't returned to the palace? Quickly go find her. Just say Ijia's body isn't well. Empress Dowager Wei held her forehead as she sent the order. Jiangya was used to being free. A palace wall couldn't restrict her. Every few days she would take a troop of female soldiers out of the city to ride horses and hunt. If she didn't return to the palace when she saw Tianhe, even the Emperor of Yen couldn't do anything to her. Empress Dowager Wei waited until the evening before seeing her. Jiangya thought she was really sick and whipped her horse back. She didn't even have time to change before she ran to the palace of Compassionate and Peaceful. Empress Dowager Wei had been fine, but she pretended to be sick, tying a cloth over her forehead as she lay on the bed, trying to make her heart soften before she could speak. You were fine 2 days ago, but you suddenly fell sick. Were you not well? Has Xian Tai seen you? Jiangya sat by the bed, her sharp eyes looking at the palace maids and internal attendants in the bedroom. If you can't serve the Empress Dowager, what use do you have? Newbie deserves to die. The people in front of her instantly knelt. You can't blame them. It was Ijia who asked for it. Empress Dowager Wei weakly raised her hand and had everyone leave, leaving only the mother and daughter to talk. 2 days ago, the palace bureau sent over a batch of trained palace maids. I have no use for them, so I wanted to do them a favor and reward them to a few meritorious officials. However, there was a mischievous one among them. She turned out to be a concubine from the previous dynasty who had sneaked out of the cold palace. She was sent to King Ping and he recognized her. As a result, the matter was brought to your brother and I was embarrassed. When Jiangya heard it was about Shui Rui, she exploded. She said angrily, that damned Lu Shining, he dared to disrespect you. Last time I really shouldn't have let him go. I should have killed that adulterous couple. She accidentally let it slip and Empress Dowager Wei instantly heard it wasn't right. She grabbed her wrist and asked, what last time? You told Ijia clearly, are you hiding something? Jiangya wanted face. She wouldn't say that she was captured and almost died under Shui Rui's sword. She could only vaguely reply, 3 months ago I set a fire in the barracks outside the city and almost burned the Yu Lianfang to death. Lu Shining rushed over and was almost killed by me in a fit of anger. Empress Dowager Wei sucked in a cold breath. She couldn't resist raising her hand to slap her. She was so angry she trembled. You evil creature, it's better if you anger me to death. It was a serious crime to set a fire in a barracks. If she really did it, it would be terrible. Yu Shu's death wasn't a pity, but Shui Rui still had military power in his hands at the time. If he flew into a rage for a woman, it would be a great disaster. Jiangya hadn't thought of the consequences. She felt wronged and bared her teeth in pain. Why are you so angry? Empress Dowager Wei poked her forehead, hating iron for not becoming steel. If that Yu Shu could have been killed, Ijia would have already killed her for you and let you marry your ideal husband. But why didn't you think after she died would Lu Shining let it go? You really think that just because you're the princess of the Great Yen, you can do whatever you want? Muddle-headed, you're muddle-headed to the end. Why did Ijia raise such a useless thing like you? Jiang Qia could only suffer in silence. The one who was truly out of control wasn't her, it was that pair of dogs. One of them kept saying that he wanted to kill her to prevent future troubles, while the other actually let a dog servant take her hostage. Right, there was also that hateful dog servant. He touched her and didn't put her, the princess, in his eyes at all. He deserved to die. Don't scold me, I know I was wrong. Her mistake was that she was blind and didn't see that those two were actually a pair. Otherwise, when she was in Ningdong City, she would have forced herself on Shui Rui. She would have ruined their happy occasion and let them cry. You really know you were wrong? Empress Dowager Wei looked suspiciously at her, probing. Do you know that your Imperial Xiong has decreed marriage for the two of them? Jiangya twisted her neck and snorted coldly. Empress Dowager Wei hurriedly grabbed her wrist. You can't be muddle-headed again. If you have to let it go, let it go. Lu Shining has to marry Yu Shu, that's because he has eyes but couldn't see. Ijia heard that woman had married someone a few years ago. The result was that the groom ran away on the day of the wedding, causing a storm in the city. Lu Shining married her in a moment of muddle-headedness. Sooner or later he will regret it. At that time you'll see if the two of them can get along. Jiangya said impatiently, whether they get along or not, it's none of my business. From now on don't mention them in front of me. Empress Dowager Wei paused upon hearing this. She hadn't thought that she would say something that didn't concern her. She seemed to have suddenly thought it through. She should have been happy but she didn't feel reassured. So she probed, then while your Imperial Xiong is choosing a Fei, Ijia will help you find a few candidates for Fuma. After your Imperial Xiong is titled Empress, then I'll organize your marriage. Is that all right? Jiangya opened her mouth to refuse, but seeing Empress Dowager Wei's hopeful expression, she couldn't say the word no. Before she could still use Shui Rui as a shield. Now what was she going to use as an excuse? Do as you see fit. She replied in a muffled voice. She stood and walked out. Rest well, don't worry about my matters. Empress Dowager Wei had urged for the marriage for 5 whole years. It was so difficult to wait for Jiangye to nod and agree. She really wanted to cry tears of joy. She silently thanked the heavens and earth inside. Seeing Jiangye slip away, she didn't stop her. When she left, she couldn't wait to start planning what kind of husband she would find for her precious daughter. Chapter 828. For the past few days, the entire Yu mansion was filled with a festive atmosphere. The reason was that their eldest daughter was going to get married again. The last time did not count, but this time it was a real happy occasion. No one wanted to talk about the farce that happened 5 years ago. The groom actually ran away on the day of the wedding, and the rumors spread everywhere. Who knew how many people laughed at their eldest daughter behind her back? No matter how capable she was, no one wanted her, and she couldn't even get married. Now they really wanted to go back and slap those people who said that my eldest daughter could not get married. Open your dog eyes and see what kind of person my son-in-law is. He was the best man in the world and the sworn brother of the emperor of the Yan kingdom. He had the looks, the power, the ability to govern the country, and the martial arts to stabilize the country. It was said that he did not have any concubines in his mansion, and there was nothing to nitpick about. Therefore, without knowing anything, Shui Rui effortlessly won the hearts of the entire Yu mansion, and became a good son-in-law in their hearts. Since the emperor's decree of marriage was spread, and King Ping sent someone to propose marriage, Aunt Shui was overjoyed these 2 days. She never dared to think that she could have a prince as her son-in-law in this life. Zhao Hui and her husband were also overjoyed. After obtaining Yu Shu's consent, they could not wait to prepare her dowry. In this big family there was only one person who was not happy, and that was Yu Xiu. He had something hidden in his heart, and when he looked at Yu Shu, who was happily waiting to get married, he could not help but ask after holding it in for 3 days. "Sister, is it because he looks like Brother Shui that you want to marry King Ping?" Yu Xiu was 16 years old this year. Although he still had the immaturity of a youth on his face, whether it was his height or his intelligence, he was far superior to his peers. He was no longer an ignorant child. He learned medical skills from He Fangji, and after a few years he had made some achievements. He could be independent in the medical center, and his acquaintances would smile and call him Dr. Xiao Yu when they saw him. Yu Shu was very pleased that Yu Xiu was able to grow into such an independent adult compared to the other young masters of the Yishua families in the capital who were still playful at such a young age. "Why would you think that?" Yu Shu shook her head with a smile. "I'm willing to marry him not because of who he looks like. It's because he's the one she's been waiting for." Yu Xiu didn't believe her and asked awkwardly, "Then do you really like him?" Hearing this, Yu Shu reached out to pinch his cheek and said straightforwardly, "Yes, big sister married him because she likes him." Yu Xiu's eyes were conflicted. He almost blurted out, "Do you like him as much as you like Brother Shui?" Yu Shu's smile froze. She suddenly remembered that 5 years ago, when she was engaged to Jing Qin, Xiao Xiu also asked her why she wanted to marry Jing Qin even though she liked Shui Rui. What was her answer at that time? She seemed to have used some other words to brush him off. She neither admitted nor denied it. Big sister? Yu Xiu saw that she was in a daze and regretted asking the wrong question. However, if he didn't ask, he would feel suffocated in his heart. He hoped that his sister could marry a good man who she liked, but Brother Shui was such a good person. Did he deserve to be forgotten like this? Yu Shu came back to her senses and looked at Yu Xiu's concerned gaze. He was her closest family in this life. Even if she had many secrets that she could only hide in her heart at this moment, she hoped that there would be someone to share the true joy in her heart. She put her arms around Yu Xiu's neck and whispered in his ear, "The person I like is your brother Shui." Yu Xiu was dumbfounded. After a while he came to his senses and opened his mouth to call out, but Yu Xiu covered his mouth. She raised an index finger to her lips and blinked, silently telling him that this was a secret. Yu Xiu nodded vigorously. When she let go of him, he couldn't help but open the corner of his mouth and giggle. "So King Ping is Brother Shui. That's great, that's great." Regarding the marriage between Yu Shu and Shui Rui, Yun Hua's feelings were a little complicated. On one hand he was happy to see it happen, but on the other hand he felt awkward. His junior sister from the same sect was going to become his daughter-in-law. The seniority was really messed up. However, this was not a big deal. It was good for the two of them to get married. Sooner or later he would have to leave the capital. With such a smart and capable woman like Yu Shu by Shui Rui's side, he would be able to leave with peace of mind. Speaking of which, it was funny. When he was young he always wanted to make a name for himself. A man's ambition was to travel far and wide. However, he had concealed his identity for 20 years. From a young man with soaring ambitions, he had become an old man with white hair on his temples. When the day came for him to make a name for himself, he didn't want to stay on this road for even a moment longer. At first, to fulfill his master's orders, he entered and left the imperial court and went through life and death tribulations. Later, because of the obsession in his heart, he helped Jiang Huaying fight for the world and destroyed a dynasty. However, because of all of this, he lost his beloved wife at the same time, let down a woman who was infatuated with him, and abandoned a pair of flesh and blood. No one knew how much regret he had in his heart. However, he could not turn back on the path he had taken. He could not bring back the people he had let down. He did not want to regret anymore. So, while he was still alive before his bones became completely old, he wanted to look back on the scenery he had missed in this life. He wanted to see with his own eyes the mountains and rivers that he had given everything for. He no longer schemed against others and no longer suppressed himself. Then, when the day of his death came, he should be able to go to the underworld with a smile and go through the next reincarnation. Since Yun Hua had the intention to leave, he naturally would not care that the Celestial Commissioner had returned to Yu Shu's hands. He would not be wrong. The Emperor of Yen had the qualities to grow into a wise ruler. He was broad-minded and knew people well. Whether it was Yu Shu or Shui Rui, they could both display their abilities under his rule and recreate a peaceful and prosperous era for the benefit of the people. Without the bewitchment of the Book of Mystic Fairy, those in power would not be unscrupulous. The world would definitely follow the will of the people and return to the right track. Before he left, there was one more thing he had to do. That was to meet Yu Shu alone and unload the last heavy burden on his shoulders. A distinguished guest suddenly came to the Celestial Commissioner. A notification came from outside the Taishi Tower, saying that the State Preceptor had come to visit. Yu Shu was really surprised. She stood up to welcome him while guessing the purpose of Yun Hua's visit. When she arrived at the door, Yun Hua had already arrived at the Juku Bridge. He was wearing a plain robe. His hair was in a loose bun and he was wearing a pair of square shoes. 2 straw ropes were tied at the bottom of his trousers. He looked neither fish nor fowl. If it were not for his handsome face that was easy to recognize, and his wrinkled face did not make him look old, it would be a problem for him to enter the Celestial Commissioner's door with his sloppy appearance. I didn't know that the State Preceptor would come. Please forgive me for not going out to welcome you. No one knew that they were actually brothers and sisters from the same sect. They still had to pretend when they met. As long as you don't blame me for coming uninvited. Yun Hua's voice was still hoarse and unpleasant to the ears. Fortunately, he could speak as usual. This was all thanks to Shui Rui, who had buried the hatchet with him and recognized him as his father. He no longer deliberately punished Yun Hua. After carefully recuperating for a few years, he finally did not cough up blood so often. Looking around at the scenery, he could not help but be filled with emotion. He came here more than 20 years ago, and he was only a step away from becoming the master of this place. He revisited this place, but things were still the same, but the people had changed. His nemesis, Zhu Muzhao, was once so arrogant when he was alive, but in the end he died quietly. He found a way out for the Celestial Commissioner, but in the end he could not protect the Empire of Daen. He sighed in his heart and turned his head to look at Yu Shu, but he showed an amiable smile. It's quiet here. There is a pine forest at the back and there are celestial birds raised there. This way please. Yu Shu led the way in front and brought Yun Hua through the corridor outside Taishi Tower to avoid the eyes and ears of idlers. The two of them sat down in the pavilion at the end of the 9-turn bridge, and Yu Shu asked Yun Hua the reason for his visit. Senior brother, it's rare for you to be in the mood to visit me. What's the matter? Yun Hua deliberately put on a straight face and said, You're so rude. You still call me senior brother. Do you have to wait until the day you get married before I can hear you change the way you address me? Yu Shu said innocently, I'm afraid that if I call you that, you won't even be able to wait for my and my brother's wedding, and you'll go into seclusion. Her words were half true and half false. Yun Hua did have the intention to leave. Presumably he would only leave after she and Shui Rui got married. I've waited for more than 20 years. A few more days won't make a difference. Yun Hua's words confirmed her guess. Where are you going? She took the opportunity to ask, afraid that she would never hear from him again. Yun Hua stretched out his hand and pointed in a direction. The south. I'm going to look for 2 people first. Yu Shu was not surprised. Her eyes flickered and she said, Are you going to look for Jing Chen and Master? Yun Hua nodded and looked at the birds playing in the water on the shore. He said faintly, You already know the identity and origin of Master. He is the great and calamity from 100 years ago, Prince Yuan Zheng. The person who killed him was the female general Gong Sun Jing, who was his childhood sweetheart and later married to him. In order to obtain the god's destiny bone, the celestial commissioner first framed the Gong Sun family and sent them to prison. Then she imprisoned Master and took away their own flesh and blood. You can imagine how sorrowful and resentful the parents would be when a baby who was less than a year old had his tendons and bones pulled out and died without a complete corpse. The relationship between Yu Shu and Daoist Qingzheng was far less deep than the relationship between Yun Hua and Daoist Qingzheng. They were master and disciple, and they were as close as father and son. When Yu Shu heard about this tragic past, she could understand that her master was obsessed with revenge for 100 years, let alone Yun Hua. You would definitely feel the same way. Yu Shu did not interrupt. Although she had heard the story of the prince and the female general told by Zhu Muzhao and Prince Xiang respectively, the truest version was undoubtedly the one that Daoist Qingzheng told Yun Hua himself. Master broke out of the prison and rescued Master's wife. In order to avoid the pursuers, the two of them fled into the imperial mausoleum in the eastern suburbs. Perhaps it was the will of the heavens. The tomb was full of traps, but they broke into the depths of the tomb and found the items buried with Empress Ningxin, which were the 6 instruments for the founding of the nation. Among the 6 instruments, the Book of Mystery Woman's 6 Wrens was secretly taken out by the former emperor. The 7-star ruler was missing 2 stars and it was cut out to become the emperor's personal item. It was said that the Fuxi plate was owned by the celestial commissioners Big Tiao. Shi Rui was nowhere to be found. Only the Chun Jun sword and the Tai Ching cauldron were intact. There was an inscription engraved in the tomb, detailing the use of the 6 instruments for the founding of the nation. At the end, there was also a personal letter written by Emperor An Wu, stating that the 6 instruments were buried with Empress Ningxin. It was because of her last words that the 6 instruments were against the natural order. If misused, it would harm the harmony of heaven and bring disaster upon oneself. Even she could not escape her retribution. Yu Shu frowned and thought uneasily, if Empress Ningxin died young and could not leave behind any children or descendants in her life as her retribution, then is the celestial commissioner's Big Tiao also a curse from the Book of Mystery Woman's Big Tiao who had a short life? She was slightly distracted, but then she realized that there was something wrong with Yun Hua's words. He said that Master found the Chun Jun sword and the Tai Ching cauldron in Empress Ningxin's tomb? Wait. She could not help but interrupt and asked, since Master found the Chun Jun sword, why didn't he take it away at that time? Heaven and earth knew that the real Chun Jun sword was now in her hands, and she was very sure that she did not get the Chun Jun sword by chance, but a trap set by Qing Zheng. He kept her in the dark until the day she had the ability to see through the truth. But more than 20 years ago, Daoist Qing Zheng did not give the Chun Jun sword to Yun Hua. Instead he kept it for 20 years and gave it to her. What? She had always thought that Yun Hua did not know that the Chun Jun sword had been stolen from the imperial mausoleum by Daoist Qing Zheng 100 years ago. That was why he had waited for 20 years. But now it seemed that this was not the case. It seemed that there was something wrong with her perception. Yu Shu looked at Yun Hua suspiciously. She subconsciously felt that he was hiding something from her, or lying to her. Yun Hua met her suspicious gaze and coughed softly. He clenched his fist and put it on his lips. He confessed, actually, senior brother, I lied to you about one thing. At this time he actually called himself senior brother. Yu Shu's mouth twitched. She crossed her hands in front of her chest and straightened her back. Suddenly she raised her aura. Yun Hua looked at the sky. In the end he felt guilty and could not look directly at her eyes. I lied to you and said that Master asked me to come to the capital to destroy the Book of Mystery Fairy Lu Rin just like you. In fact, Master did not ask me to destroy it. Instead he asked me to bring the Book of Mystery Fairy to see him. I know that the Chun Jun sword is in Master's hands. He did not give the sword to me because he was worried that I would be tempted by the Book of Mystery Fairy. So, he kept the Chun Jun sword and had to destroy it with his own hands. I know that he resented the Da'an royal family and the court. The reason why he wanted to destroy the Book of Mystery Fairy was to end all of this. I also hated the imperial power and hated the inhumanity of the celestial commissioner, but I was afraid that I would not be able to see the day when the Da'an dynasty would be destroyed. So, I disobeyed Master's orders and took away the Book of Mystery Fairy without authorization. I used its influence to cause the destruction of the Da'an dynasty. To put it bluntly, he used Yu Shu and Shui Rui. One of them was a person who could reverse the rise and fall of the Da'an dynasty. The other was a talented general who could assist the Emperor Star in fighting for the world. He deliberately led the two of them to a dead end. Both of them rebelled and accelerated the destruction of the Yin dynasty. Now that the world has changed, the old country has been destroyed and the past is over. I finally did not disappoint Master's orders. I have the face to bring the Book of Mystery Fairy Lu Ren to see him. Yunhua gave her an explanation. Yu Shu was expressionless, but she had mixed feelings in her heart. She finally understood why the Taoist Qing Zheng handed the Chunjun sword to her, but Yunhua did not know. Master regretted it. She told the truth. For the sake of a book of Xiannu Lu Ren, you almost destroyed your entire life. Perhaps Master had already expected it, but he still regretted it afterwards. What's more, he never thought that in order to take revenge, you would take away the book of Xiannu without authorization, enduring humiliation for so many years. Destroying the Book of Mystery Fairy Lu Ren was a pretense from the beginning to the end. The Taoist Qing Zheng's real purpose should be to use her to lure Yunhua out. Through her mouth, he told Yunhua that he regretted it. She originally planned to bring a secret along with her origin to the grave. However, at this moment, looking at Yunhua who had gone through the vicissitudes of life, she suddenly could not bear to say it. She decided to say it even if it was another kind of cruelty. Senior, Master handed the Chunjun sword to me. I guess he must want to tell you that he has already let go of it. He hopes that you will not make a mistake again. Yunhua was stunned. The expression on his face became absent-minded. He slowly turned his head to look at Yu Shu. When he saw the pity in her eyes, he instantly felt bitter, as if seawater had been poured into his heart. He raised his hand to cover his face. He did not want others to see his embarrassment. It turned out that Master did not blame him. It turned out that he had made a mistake. Is the Chunjun sword in your hands? Yes, it is with me. Yu Shu did not say much about how she got the Chunjun sword. She thought that Yunhua would not listen to her now. Sure enough, Yunhua sat quietly for a moment before he got up and left. Junior, thank you for telling me the truth today. My mind is in a mess now. Let me go back and think about it. Chapter 829. Before the wedding date of Yu Shu and Shui Rui arrived, there was a major event that was put on the agenda. It was the selection of the harem, and the Yin Emperor would choose an empress. Yu Shu would personally organize it. The Kunling Bureau would select women of suitable age in Jing, considering their family background, appearance, and conduct. 32 outstanding people would be sent to the palace to see the emperor and be decided by the Yin Emperor. That morning, after the selection girls were dressed, they first went to the Kunling Bureau to verify their identities. Then they boarded carriages and were escorted into the palace by the Shenwei army. Because Yu Shu had to attend morning court, she wasn't among them. She was led into the palace by the female official of the Kunling Bureau, Qinglan. Of the 32 Xiongnu, there were 3 candidates most likely to ascend to the throne of empress. One was the golden daughter of Cheng-En Marquis Fu Wei Manchu. As the niece of Empress Dowager Wei, she had a higher chance of winning than the others. Another was the precious granddaughter of the Duke of Ning, General Dai Ying. Not mentioning the Dai family's contribution in founding the country, this Miss Dai was said to be an outstanding beauty and good at riding and archery. With the Yin Emperor's background, he should like this kind of girl. The last one was the Yin Emperor's teacher, the youngest daughter of the great scholar Ji Huda, Ji Jinjia. Ji Hongru was admired by the literati of the world. It could be said that after the Yin Emperor moved the capital to Jing, no literati of the previous dynasty died for the country. It was all because of his persuasion. As to who the final winner would be, it would depend on the Yin Emperor. He wasn't a weak ruler that relied on the support of the officials to sit on the throne. He didn't need to listen to the officials. He could make his own decisions. The beauties had to enter the palace through Shihua Gate. Getting off the carriage, they had to walk. Fortunately, it was a good time of autumn. Otherwise, if they walked all the way to the Hall of Supreme Harmony, sweating and ruining their makeup, how would they be able to enter the emperor's eyes? Situ Qinglan had been an imperial official for 5 years and had entered the palace many times. She and the eunuchs sent by the Department of Rites led the way, passing through the side of the imperial garden without looking sideways. The autumn scenery was particularly enchanting. In the distance, the maple forest was like fire, and near them, there was a turbulent silver spring. There was a slight commotion among the group of women behind them, and laughter could be heard. Situ Qinglan did not stop them. She thought of the situation when she first entered the palace. She had never been in such a mood. At that time, she was trembling with fear, afraid that she would make a mistake. How could she care about the beautiful scenery in front of her? She turned her head and glanced at the group of teenage girls, her eyes filled with envy. She knew that one of them would rise to the top with a single step and become the empress of Great Yin Dynasty, the motherly model of the world. She could only sigh at her own fate. 6 years ago, when the Yin Emperor was still the Dong Jing Wang of the north, his mother Wei Guofuran, who was now Empress Dowager Wei, brought her daughter to Jing and held a birthday banquet in the Wang Fu, using this as an excuse to choose a Wang Fei for Dong Jing Wang, who still remembered that day when she had correctly guessed the 4 riddles of Wei Guofuran, seen the heirloom of the Jiang family, and had a chance to compete for the throne of Dong Jing Wang Fei. It was a pity that it wasn't the right time and she missed this marriage. After she became the Celestial Commissioner, it wasn't that there weren't good families that came to propose, but she wasn't willing. She begged the Grand Secretary to tell a divination for her, saying that the marriage hadn't come yet, and wanted her to wait. She waited until now. She was 24 years old. If she kept waiting, when would it be? When Situ Qinglan's drifting thoughts reached the outside of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, she immediately stopped. She first had Eunuch's son go in to pass on the message, and then heard the summons for her to come in to answer, leaving behind the 32 Xiozha outside to wait for their names to be called. In the side hall of the Hall of Supreme Harmony, Empress Dowager Wei and the eldest princess had arrived first. They didn't see the other Fei Pin of the Hogong. It must be that Empress Dowager Wei cared for her niece and didn't want her to lower her head to the low-ranking palace Fei, so she didn't let them come out. This subject kowtows in salute to Empress Dowager. May Nyang have 10,000 blessings and peace, Situ Qinglan first kowtowed. When Empress Dowager Wei told her to rise, she went to greet Princess Jiangya. She was slightly nervous. She didn't know if the Empress Dowager and the princess still remembered her. Empress Dowager Wei saw it was a female official with a flower-embroidered patch on her shoulder. Her head was lowered and her face couldn't be seen clearly, so she didn't pay much attention to her. She asked with a faint expression, "Where is the great advisor? Why did he send you? Didn't I just say that she would personally supervise?" Situ Qinglan had been in the bureaucracy for a few years and could hear that Empress Dowager Wei was purposefully finding fault. Her words were full of dissatisfaction towards Yu Shu. She respectfully answered, "Empress Dowager, there is a court conference on the 7th. The great advisor has gone to court. He was afraid that he wouldn't make it in time and delay the important matter, so he ordered this subject to manage for him." Empress Dowager Wei glanced at her. She raised her hand and a palace servant brought the list of Xiongnu in front of her. Opening it, she scanned it and said, "The emperor hasn't left court yet. Call a few people in to take a look." As she spoke, her finger pointed at 7 or 8 names. The palace servant took a look and memorized them. He quickly walked to the door to call out the names. Situ Qinglan's ears perked up. Among them was the name of Wei Manchu, the daughter of the Marquis of Cheng'an-Fu. There were also a few names that weren't well known. But there weren't any of the other 2 popular candidates for the title of empress. He even had people wait outside. A procession of young girls gracefully entered the side hall and bowed. The hem of their dresses spread on the ground like flowers blooming on the branches. It was unspeakably pleasing to the eye. Situ Qinglan sneaked a glance and saw a smile appear on Empress Dowager Wei's face. Her expression instantly became benevolent. It wasn't as cold as it had been before and seemed overly dignified. She looked at Jiangya. She was lazily sitting next to the Empress Dowager, looking disinterested. "Stand up." Situ Qinglan turned her eyes again. The first thing she saw was Wei Xiaojia with a face as red as a peach. 16 years of age, as delicate as a cherry that had just been picked. That pair of spirited eyes. With one look, it could be seen that this was a treasure that had grown up in a honeypot. "The emperor is busy every day and will come later. Since there's nothing to do, Ijia should find something to do. Ijia knows that you are all daughters of noble families. Which one of you is skilled in something? Why don't Ijia take a look?" The girls looked left and right. The first one to step forward was a sweet-looking young girl. When she smiled, 2 dimples appeared on her cheeks. She was very likable. "Empress Dowager, this one is Gu Qingqin. My father is the Minister of Works, Gu Jingshui. This one isn't talented and isn't very skilled in the 4 arts. I did learn a technique to use the flute to play the sound of 100 birds. Please allow this one to show my incompetence." Maybe it was that older people liked this kind of lively and cute little girl. Empress Dowager Wei didn't have a cold expression because she stole her niece's limelight. She smiled and asked her, "Did you bring a flute?" Miss Gu nodded in response. She took the short flute hanging at her waist as a decoration. Putting it to her lips, she blinked her eyes and started to play. First she imitated the lark, then the oriole. Sometimes it was clear, sometimes it was melodious. In a row, she imitated more than 10 kinds of birds. It was amazing that she could pass off the fake as the real one. At the end of the song, Empress Dowager Wei gave her face and clapped her hands. This flute isn't bad. Aijia will remember you. In the future, I'll be counting on you to relieve Aijia's boredom. This sentence was equivalent to sealing Miss Gu's future. Receiving the Empress Dowager's favor, as long as she wasn't stupid, she would hug this thigh tightly. Her days in the future wouldn't be bad. Miss Gu was overjoyed, but Wei Manchu wasn't. Pouting, she said coquettishly, Empress Dowager likes the Gu family's Mimi to know how to play the flute. What to do? Juju doesn't know those playful tricks. Does Empress Dowager not like this child? Everyone present knew what relationship Wei Miss and Empress Dowager were. To be able to act coquettishly in front of others, it could be seen that the Empress Dowager doted on her. As expected, Empress Dowager Wei wasn't angry. She reached out with a finger and pointed at her from a distance. She teased, "You like to be pretentious. Since you don't know anything, you still dare to come into the palace. Aren't you afraid that Aijia will kick you out?" Wei Manchu smiled, not afraid at all. She pretended to be helpless as she said, "Then Juju can only play a song so that you won't kick me out." Empress Dowager Wei calculated the time. The emperor should be on his way, so she sent someone to the back to bring a zither that had been prepared beforehand. She placed it in the middle of the hall, set up a tea table and embroidered stool, put up an incense burner. Everything was ready. Wei Manchu, dignified and magnanimous, sat in front of the zither, stretching out her slender white fingers, wearing pink fake nails. The beauty was happy and angry at the same time, quiet and active at the same time. After the sound of the zither started, the surrounding people all shouted at her, turning into the background. Her skills on the zither were extraordinary. Just now that Miss Gu had taken advantage of Chower. It was rare to play a few bird cries on the flute, but compared to this powerful movement of 100 birds paying homage to the phoenix, it was a far cry. When the women waiting outside the hall heard this song, they didn't know what they would feel. But when Sidu Qinglan saw this scene, the corners of her eyes started to sting. No one knew that many years ago she had placed a man she had never met in her heart. She had had hopes and fantasies, but it would all become bubbles today. When the song reached a high place, 2 people walked in from outside the hall, one in front and one behind, without a sound. The beauties in the hall were sensitive. When they turned their heads and saw a bright yellow robe embroidered with a 5-clawed golden dragon, they hurriedly knelt down. The sound of the zither didn't stop. Wei Manchu lightly closed her eyes, playing the zither. The side of her beautiful face was exposed to the emperor's gaze. This should have been a stunning entrance. According to Empress Dowager Wei's plan, the emperor's heart should have been moved by now. But she had missed one thing. The Emperor of Yen recognized this zither-playing Biaomei. The Emperor of Yen was in his 30s and didn't care much for women. It would be hard to use beauty to move him. Even more, he knew that this Biaomei was younger than him by half his age. No matter how beautiful she was in his eyes, she was just a little girl that hadn't grown up yet. Where did she come from? Where did his heart come from? The Emperor of Yan's gaze only paused on his Biaomei for a moment before moving away. He knew what the Empress Dowager was planning. She just wanted the Wei family to have a proper empress. Good things should be kept within the family. If this had happened half a month ago, he would have fulfilled his mother's wish and made the Wei family even more prestigious. But what had happened in between had reminded him. Filial piety was necessary, but if it was foolishly filial, it would cause disaster sooner or later. It was better to cut off this seed early to avoid future trouble. These are the beauties chosen from Jing? The Emperor of Yen walked past the crowd. Behind him was Yu Shu, who had come after the court. The sound of the zither suddenly stopped. Miss Wei turned her head to look and hurriedly left her seat. Shyly and timidly, she lifted the corner of her dress and knelt down. "That's your Wei family Biaomei. You don't recognize her?" The Empress Dowager teased. The Emperor of Yen praised, "A girl changes 18 times between childhood and womanhood. Biaomei is even more beautiful and plays the zither better." On this side, Jiang Qia was so bored she was about to fall asleep. When she raised her head and saw Yu Shu, she instantly woke up. She stood and walked out, completely forgetting what the Empress Dowager had told her before. "I lost something important on the road. I have to go back and find it." "Wait," Empress Dowager Wei didn't stop her. She was furious, but she couldn't criticize her daughter in public. The Emperor of Yen walked forward and urged, Hualan can't sit still. Just let her be. Empress Dowager Wei didn't know what to say. She had originally arranged for Jiang Qia to add fuel to the fire so that the Emperor of Yen could directly choose the daughter of the Wei family to be the empress. Without a helper, how could this show continue? Yu Shu clearly saw that Jiang Qia had run when she saw her. She was puzzled inside but pretended nothing had happened. The Emperor of Yen bestowed a seat and she sat down to watch the spectacle. The hall was filled with beautiful young girls, too much for the eye to take in. The most outstanding was the young miss that had just played the zither. She was from the Marquis Cheng'en Fu. Diske, a 15 or 16-year-old girl was as tender as a spring onion. Could the emperor really do it? Out of the corner of her eyes she saw Sidu Qinglan standing in the corner. The corner of her mouth rose. She beckoned for her to come over and stand behind her. Sidu Qinglan had followed her for 5 years. She couldn't compare to Wen Shaoan, who was dead set on her, but at least she was loyal. It was worth her helping her and letting her get what she wanted. Even more, the Empress Dowager didn't know that Shi Yu wasn't easy to deal with. Then she would let her have a taste of her power. Reporting to the Holy One this time, there are 32 beauties that entered the palace. No matter if it's talent or family background, they are all of the best. Here is the birth and 8 characters that this subject has personally written for them. Holy One, please take a look. Yu Shu took out a red invitation that she had prepared beforehand from her sleeve and handed it to Sidu Qinglan behind her for her to present. Even Empress Dowager Wei hadn't seen this before. Seeing this, she couldn't help but frown, slightly worried that Yu Shu would mess things up. The Yen Emperor didn't think so much. The Yen Emperor did not think so much. He looked at the female official walking forward with her head lowered. Because he had never seen her before, he could not help but take a few more glances. He saw that she was wearing a well-tailored robe, her figure slender and graceful. She did not wear a wig on her head, and her hair was neatly bundled behind her head. There was only a palm-sized jade crown on her head. 2 strands of hair fell from her forehead, shadowing her gentle and pleasant features. She was actually a very pleasing beauty. She stood in front of those young girls, showing off the beauty of her age. Situ Qinglan lowered her head as she raised the red invitation. She didn't step out of line at all, but in reality her heart was beating rapidly. Last night, when she knew that she was going to the palace to meet the emperor, she had been so flustered she hadn't slept well. Just now, when the emperor had walked in from outside, she had only dared to sneak a peek. After a hurried glance, the handsome and extraordinary figure merged with the person she was hiding in her heart. She couldn't help but feel ashamed of herself. This was the most noble man in the world. She couldn't have wishful thinking. How could she be worthy? Empress Dowager Wei's attention was all on the red invitation. She didn't even notice the slight reaction between the emperor and that female official. She patiently waited for the emperor to read it before reaching out to take it. With one look, her brows relaxed. Wei Manchu's fate was very good. It was a sign of good fortune. There was nothing wrong with it. Empress Dowager Wei raised her head to glance at Yu Shu. She gave a satisfied smile, thinking, she probably wouldn't dare to make a fuss about this. The Emperor of Yen didn't say a word about the invitation. Empress Dowager Wei gave the order for the Xiongnu waiting outside the hall to all come in. There was no need to split into groups. Luckily, the side hall was spacious enough. It wasn't crowded for 20 people to come in at once. But the 8 that came in first stood at the very front. The ones that came later could only stand at the back. This way, no matter how beautiful that daughter of the Dai family was, she wouldn't be very eye-catching among the flowers. The Xiongnu all reported their families and exchanged a few words. The Emperor of Yen recognized the people and had a plan. He turned to ask Empress Dowager Wei's opinion. There are so many people, the sun is dazzled. In your view, who is suitable for the position of Empress? Empress Dowager Wei clearly had a candidate in mind, but she couldn't be too impatient. Her son might be filial, but he wasn't someone she could control. She deliberated and said, the Pearl of Grand Scholar Ji's family is virtuous and talented, and has an extraordinary bearing. The daughter of Duke Ningfu is lively, generous and intelligent. Your Jiuzhou's Manchu is quiet and dignified and has a long fortune. All of them are good, Ijia really can't choose. Which one did the emperor choose? The hearts of the 3 girls she called trembled, their palms sweating. They knew that the Emperor of Yan's next words could decide their fate. A short silence appeared in the great hall. The 32 Xiongnu all held their breaths, waiting for the emperor's decision. The Emperor of Yan's gaze flitted across the young and immature faces. He smiled slightly, saying, Zhen still feels that to be the empress, the mother of the world, one's heart must be broad and able to tolerate others. Benevolent teacher is a great scholar of a generation. His daughter has been well taught and will not disappoint Zhen. Come, send down the order. The daughter of the Ji family is virtuous and talented. Her bearing is generous. Zhen likes her. Today she will be made empress. The coronation will be a month later. Have the celestial commissioner and the Ministry of Rites prepare. The last sentence was directed at Yushu. Pick a good day. This subject obeys. Empress Dowager Wei's smile froze at the corner of her mouth. The emperor didn't even leave any room to maneuver and just made the decision. She couldn't persuade him otherwise. The situation that she had thought was in the bag became nothing. Looking at the little face of the daughter of the Wei family, there was no trace of her previous satisfaction. She bit her red lips and almost cried. After that, the Emperor of Yen bestowed Wei Manchu the title of Shu Fei, Dying the title of Li Pin. For the remaining women he bestowed Tu Jiu, Tu Jiaoi for beauties, for talents. The rest were virtuous women to fill the inner palace. Empress Dowager Wei managed to hold on until the end before leaving with the excuse that she wasn't feeling well. The Emperor of Yen knew that he had angered his mother this time, but he wasn't in a hurry to apologize. He waved his sleeve and called for Yu Shu to go with him to the imperial study. After that, the Bureau of Rites sent the newly promoted Fei Pin and nobility to the inner palace. Situ Qinglan, because she had an errand, also followed. Coming out of the Supreme Harmony Hall, the Emperor of Yen didn't mention the matter of the Empress. He was slightly absent-minded and didn't speak. Yu Shu was a few steps behind. She suddenly gave a low laugh and disturbed his thoughts. He turned his head and saw the smile on her face. He asked, "What wonderful thing are you thinking about?" Yu Shu's face quickly tensed. She lowered her head and said, "This subject doesn't dare to speak." If she didn't dare to speak, then it had something to do with him. The Emperor of Yen raised an eyebrow and his curiosity was piqued. "Speak, and I will forgive you." Yu Shu's expression was a bit awkward. He braced himself and said, "I just remembered that when your majesty was a hidden dragon in the abyss, the Empress Dowager came to the capital to help you choose a concubine. She even held a banquet in the mansion and invited many noble young ladies. I also went with Big Brother." The Emperor of Yen did remember this, but he hadn't been present at that time. He didn't know what was worth her laughing at. "Continue, what are you laughing at?" "Oh, the Empress Dowager must have wanted to test one's character, so she gave 4 riddles. She said that one of the 4 riddles was the heirloom of the Jiang family. Whoever could guess it would get a prize. Cough cough, who would have thought that the so-called heirloom was a pair of cloth shoes? When people saw it, they didn't take it seriously. They all thought that the Empress Dowager was making fun of them." Yu Shu's point of humor was clearly here. The Emperor of Yen also laughed and asked her casually, "Then did anyone guess it correctly?" Yu Shu hesitated for a moment and said, "There is indeed one person. Speaking of which, this person is the one your majesty saw just now. She is the female imperial official in front of this subject." The Emperor of Yen suddenly stopped walking and turned around. Against the warm autumn sun, his expression couldn't be seen clearly. "It's her. Is she married?" This question was a bit redundant. At that age she had both talent and appearance. She was probably married long ago. "Not yet." Yu Shu lowered her head and didn't look at the Emperor's expression. She explained a bit more. "Her life is indeed a bit pitiful. Her parents passed away early and she lived under someone else's roof at a young age. Later, she relied on her own hard work and passed the Dian examination and became a celestial commissioner. As a woman, I couldn't help but take care of her. Perhaps it was I who gave her a bad idea. She was good at everything and never agreed to anyone who proposed marriage. That's how it has been delayed until now." The Emperor of Yen listened patiently to Yu Shu finish talking about her life, and a strange feeling suddenly arose in his heart. A figure flashed in front of his eyes. At that time he only felt that she was gentle and pleasing to the eye. Now that he knew that she was a woman who was gentle yet strong, he missed her even more. She hadn't married until now. Was it because of him? "What's her name?" he asked suddenly. "Situ Qinglan." Yu Shu hid a smile in her eyes. He had to get closer to see it. Chapter 830. After the results of the consort selection, the good news was sent out of the palace on the same day. Kunling Bureau also sent officials to each Fu to report the good news. Yu Shu personally went to Grand Secretary Ji's Fu. The Ji family had the first empress of the Great Yen. A great honor fell on the heads of the family. It was enough to bring glory to the ancestors. It could be imagined that the girls of the Ji family would become precious and hard to find. Ji Hongru had become the father-in-law of the country and successfully entered the ranks of the imperial family. He was not a pedantic person. Otherwise, he would not have supported the Emperor of Yen to become the emperor. He was not like some of the elders in the court who disliked Yu Shu, this woman who came later. He was very polite to her, treating her as an honored guest and thanking her again and again. The old man was smart. He came late to have a daughter. None of his first 3 sons were as considerate as his youngest daughter. Sending her into the palace was out of helplessness. He had thought that with the Empress Dowager's own niece in front of him, the Empress would never be his family's turn. But he chose his daughter and tricked Empress Dowager Wei. If one said that this result had nothing to do with Yu Shu, old man Ji wouldn't believe it. The Princess Royal had been pestering Ning Wang when they were in the capital. When they reached Jing, Ning Wang and this famous female official of the previous dynasty got along and somehow managed to coax the emperor to grant the marriage. The cooked duck flew away. How could the Empress Dowager and the Princess Royal not hate? The two sides had a grudge. Maybe after a few moves, the position of Empress finally landed in his family. No matter how it came about, Ji Hongru knew he couldn't offend the woman in front of him. The Celestial Commissioner was in her hands and there was also the Kunling Bureau. His youngest daughter had just arrived in the palace and needed to rely on her for many things. Therefore, Yu Shu and the newly appointed imperial father-in-law Ji exchanged pleasantries and formed a friendship. They had a mutual understanding that from now on, their common enemy would be the Empress Dowager in the Hogong. Imperial father-in-law Ji personally saw Yu Shu to the gate. Seeing her get on the sedan, he turned and calmed down. He gathered all the sons and daughters-in-law of the 3 branches to the study and carefully beat them up to prevent any more accidents before the Empress's coronation ceremony. When Yu Shu returned to Taishi Tower, the sun had just set. She wrote a note and asked the black-robed guards to send it to Shui Rui to let him know that the Empress had been decided. The Ji family was very sensible. Ji Hongru's guess was absolutely correct. Half of the reason why Wei family lost the Empress was due to Shui Rui and Yu Shu's efforts. This matter was not difficult to handle. As long as they accurately grasped the Emperor's thoughts, Shui Rui's side would inconspicuously throw a tantrum while Yu Shu's side would restrain the Empress Dowager and secretly build support for the 2 daughters of Dai family and Ji family, causing the Empress Dowager to feel a sense of crisis and have no choice but to stand up for her maiden daughter. Yet the higher the Empress Dowager Wei raised Miss Wei, the more the Emperor disliked her. Even more, the Marquis of Qing'an Wei Shihan wasn't the Emperor's Di Jiujiu. Was there a need to give his family so much face? When the Empress Dowager comes back to herself, she will probably be very angry. Yu Shu leaned against the chair, one hand propping up her head, the other lightly tapping the white jade table. She hummed, "She is heartless, I am heartless." Empress Dowager Wei didn't come to provoke her and Shui Rui, didn't provoke Shui Rui and the Emperor. Who cared if the daughter of the Wei family became the Empress? She and Shui Rui weren't useless. Situ Nuyu is here. A report came from outside the tower. Let her in. Yu Shu put away her lazy attitude and sat up straight to see the person come in. Situ Qinglan had been running around the palace for a whole day and was exhausted. She forced herself to come back to report. Grand Secretary, the consorts of the palaces have already been settled in. Empress Ji will temporarily live in Phoenix Perching Palace before the conferment ceremony. Consort Wei Shu was originally arranged to live in Yongla Palace, but the Empress Dowager later issued an edict and changed it to Zhongzui Palace. Pin Li was granted to live in Xixia Palace, and the 2 Jiu and the 2 Jiaoi are temporarily living in a side hall. The rest are scattered. When Yu Shu learned of the Empress Dowager's interference, she said without hesitation, "The 2 honored consort Shu of the previous dynasty didn't have a good ending in Yongla Palace. The Empress Dowager is afraid that consort Wei Shu will also be unlucky, so she moved to Zhongzui Palace, a place with good feng shui. Does she want our dynasty to have an Empress Dowager Shui?" Hehe. Situ Qinglan kept her head low and didn't reveal any strange expression when Yu Shu used Empress Dowager Shui to mock the harem. Empress Dowager Shui of the previous dynasty was Emperor Chongzhen's birth mother. She clearly had the Empress above her, but she flourished because of the late Emperor's favor. Zhongzui Palace was her residence. The Empress had no children, so she relied on her son to survive until the end and earned the honor of being a Mother Empress Dowager. She could be considered a role model for the women in the harem. Once the conferment ceremony is over, the Earth Feather Bureau will have to make preparations. Yushu was referring to the establishment of the Book of Earth. Situ Qinglan hesitated. The Book of Earth is an old system of the previous dynasty. The Empress Dowager is in charge of the harem now. She hasn't mentioned this matter, so I'm afraid she won't be willing to continue using it. Also, His Majesty might not be happy. Commissioner, Celestial Commissioner, you can make arrangements for him on your own. Yushu nodded. You're right, but the Book of Earth can't be removed. Otherwise, where will the Earth Feather Bureau get its authority? Therefore, we have to amend the old system and allow it to continue according to our emperor's temperament. What do you mean? In the previous dynasty, the emperor had to follow the schedule on the Book of Earth to visit the Faipin of the palaces. We can change it. The Book of Earth won't record which Faipin's turn will be favored, only which Faipins are not suitable to be favored. The rest will be up to the emperor to do as he pleases. Relaxing the restrictions didn't mean there were no restrictions. Removing the restrictions on the emperor and shifting it to the Faipin, it would preserve the authority of the Earth Feather Bureau and wouldn't annoy the emperor. Taishu is wise and has deep foresight. Situ Qinglan asked in a low voice, if the Empress Dowager comes out to obstruct it, what will happen? Yushu smiled carelessly and said meaningfully, is there only the Empress Dowager in the Hogong? Where do you put the Empress? The one who should support the use of the Book of Earth the most was undoubtedly the Empress. And if Empress Ji wanted to sit firmly in the position of Empress, she couldn't do it without the help of the Earth Feather Bureau. This was called mutual benefit. It was more useful than any kind of face or favor. Situ Qinglan admired inside. Taishu's manipulation of power had reached the point of perfection. Empress Dowager Wei had really lifted a rock to smash her own feet by provoking this one. Since we've finished talking about official matters, let's talk about private matters. Yushu stood and walked down the steps to the tea table by the window. Pointing at the yellow rosewood chair opposite her, she called for her to sit down and talk. In the early years I couldn't attend to you, so I didn't ask. Now that it's peaceful, I have to ask you, what are you going to do with your marriage? Are you going to continue to wait for your marriage or find someone of equal status to marry? You can't just wait like this. Look at how hard it was for her to be the superior. She had to worry about the marriage of her subordinate. Situ Qinglan hadn't expected her to suddenly mention this, and it was after the selection of the Hogong's concubines. How could she not feel guilty? She opened her mouth and said timidly, I haven't thought about it yet. Yushu poured a cup of tea to moisten her throat before saying, then think about it now. I'll give you some advice. Situ Qinglan was silent. Others didn't know, but how could she not know? Taishu's great Dongming art was profound. It was useless to lie in front of her. She probably saw through her thoughts already. Qinglan, Yushu called her by her maiden name. Her tone was much warmer than when they were talking about official matters. When a woman reaches an age but refuses to marry, it's either that she hasn't met someone she likes or that she already has someone in her heart. Which one are you? Situ Qinglan lightly bit her lower lip. She lowered her head to look at her fingers on her knees. She paused for a moment before replying in a small voice, this subordinate already has someone in my heart, but I'm not worthy of him. I don't dare to have wishful thinking. Then don't think about it anymore. I urge you to give up on it as soon as possible. Situ Qinglan looked up at her blankly. Yushu said seriously, what? Do you think I will encourage you to be so infatuated? Don't be silly. Even you say that you are not worthy of him. It's obvious that you also know that this is not a good marriage. You don't dare to fight for it and you don't want to let it go. In the end, you will be the one wasting your time. It's better to let it go as soon as possible. What do you think? Situ Qinglan was struggling in her heart. She knew what the Taishu said was right. But it was not easy to make her give up completely. If she could give up, she would have done so long ago. Before entering the palace, she also thought about ending it. However, when she saw that person with her own eyes, her idea of giving up turned into unwillingness. She couldn't deceive herself. She had always been clear about what she wanted. Yushu didn't urge her to make a decision. Instead, she waited patiently for her to make a choice. The road was dead, but people were alive. Whether or not they could walk out of it depended on themselves. Taishu, Situ Qinglan's eyes turned red unconsciously. She buried her head and didn't dare to look at Yushu's face. She stood up and took a step forward. She knelt in front of her and gathered up her courage to beg, I want to enter the palace. Please help me. Yushu had expected this result. She still felt a little sorry for her. There were so many women in the world. They were like moths flying into a flame. Even though they knew they couldn't do it, when they met the person they would still run into it. There are 3,000 beauties in the harem. The current emperor is not a man who indulges in women. You have given up your freedom and chosen the most difficult path. Yushu made it very clear. She hoped that she could stop before it was too late. Even if the Emperor of Yen had already paved the way for her, as long as she regretted it now, there was still time. Situ Qinglan gritted her teeth and said resolutely, I am not afraid. Instead of regretting for the rest of my life, it is better to try. Hey, get up. She put her hand in front of Situ Qinglan and helped her up. That meant she had agreed. Situ Qinglan was instantly overjoyed. Her eyes lit up with hope. It was undoubtedly a fool's dream for her to enter the palace and serve the emperor. She couldn't even get past the Empress Dowager. But if the Taishu was willing to help her, it would be a different story. I can let you do what you want. But you have to listen to my arrangements. Don't do anything rash. Otherwise, I won't care if it is a blessing or a curse for you in the future. There was no turning back. Situ Qinglan hurriedly promised, Don't worry, Taishu. I will never do anything stupid. Yushu nodded and then warned her, Then go back today. I will arrange a chance for you to show your face in front of the emperor. But you have to remember to keep your place and maintain your integrity. Don't use those underhanded methods. If you want to enter the Hogong, then let the emperor invite you openly. Empress Dowager Wei thought herself clever and thought that no one knew a son better than a mother. She had picked those young and tender girls for her son. But only men knew what men liked. Shui Rui had revealed to Yushu a long time ago that the emperor liked women who were as gentle as water, but couldn't be so soft that they didn't have a personality. Their age couldn't be too different. In other words, he liked women with femininity. That bunch of girls in their teens, what femininity did they have? Situ Qinglan's inferiority complex was just because of her age and birth. She didn't know that these 2 points were her strengths and suited the emperor's appetite. As long as she knew when to advance and when to retreat, she wouldn't have to worry about the emperor's love in the future. And for Yushu, arranging for Situ Qinglan to enter the palace had other uses. The Empress Dowager was too bored. Then she would muddy the waters of the Hogong, and trap her inside so she couldn't climb out. Taishu Qinglan is extremely grateful for your recognition and help. If there is a future, I will repay you. Situ Qinglan solemnly promised. Yushu smiled. She didn't believe in revenge. People would change. She didn't expect Situ Qinglan to be so humble and obedient to her like now. She didn't expect Situ Qinglan to be so powerful one day. But she could guarantee that she would always stand higher than them, and would always need them to look up to her. Chapter 831. After the great Yan established the capital of Tianjing, the situation in the court became more and more stable. However, with the Yangtze River as the boundary, the south showed signs of chaos. 4 months ago, on the eve of the fall of the Yin dynasty, the 2 Empress Dowagers and Empress Xiajiang took the young Crown Prince Lu Ying to the palace in Luoyang to seek refuge. In the 8th month of the same year, the 6-year-old Lu Ying was crowned emperor in Luoyang. The neighboring counties all responded, while Emperor Chongzhen, who was trapped in Tianjing, was unknowingly abdicated. The next month, the army sent by Emperor Yan arrived at Luoyang. It took them 3 days to break through the city. The 2 Empress Dowagers and Empress Xiajiang once again took the young emperor and fled for Fujian. 100,000 Yan soldiers split into 2 groups. One group chased them south, while the other group followed closely behind. The flames of war burned from Luoyang all the way to Jiangnan. In the face of the experienced Great Yan cavalry, the soldiers of the Imperial Guards couldn't withstand a single blow, let alone the volunteer army that had just been assembled. The remnants of the previous dynasty were defeated again and again until they surrendered without a fight. The young Emperor and Empress Dowager Xiajiang also disappeared in the chaos of the war. The 2 Empress Dowagers Rui and Shui were captured and escorted back to the capital. At the end of the 10th month, Emperor Yan conferred the title of Empress to the world. Not long after the conferring ceremony, the imperial envoy Guan Yu returned from Luoyang, escorting more than 10 prison wagons to the capital. The prisoners were all remnants of the Imperial Guards, including Rui and Shui. Emperor Yin didn't blame them for the escape of the young emperor and his mother. When he received the memorial from Guan Yu for the southern conquering general Ma Penghui and the other generals, he approved it that night. The next morning, Guan Yu was appointed as the Minister of Justice, a scholar of the Hall of Martial Heroes and a member of the cabinet. Ma Penghui was conferred the title of Count Yong-yi, 100 taels of gold and a Fergana horse. The others were rewarded according to their merits. Guan Yu became the favorite of the emperor. After the court he was targeted by a group of people. For no other reason. This new scholar had just turned 30 this year. He wasn't young but he was handsome and gentle. His wife died of illness when he was young, leaving him with only a daughter. He had no parents and no brothers. He was indeed a good son-in-law. The emperor had been conferred the empress. All the ministers in the imperial court had the idea of forming a marriage alliance. Whoever had a son or daughter, they would strike first to gain the upper hand. Thus, the morning assembly began. Guan Yu was surrounded by many people, congratulating him and trying to get close to him. Yu Shu and Shui Rui naturally wouldn't join in on the fun, nor did they need to curry favor with anyone. The two of them chatted as they walked out of Taiji Hall. When passing by this group of people, Yu Shu turned around and glanced at Guan Yu. Seeing his appearance, he immediately guessed what these people were planning and couldn't help but smile. Shui Rui saw her laughing at Guan Yu's pretty face and coughed. He said, "Don't be fooled by his scholarly and upright appearance. In reality he is very cunning. When I led troops to take down Dingzhou he was actually very cunning. This fellow followed behind and took advantage of the situation. He didn't even see a drop of blood, but he was able to gain military merits from the battle reports that were sent back to the capital. This time, he had also used flowery words to coax the emperor into sending him south as an imperial envoy. Following behind Ma Penghui to steal merits, he actually managed to sneak into the cabinet." Hearing this, Yu Shu knew there was an exaggeration in his words. If Guan Yu was really so unbearable, he would have taken action long ago to get rid of him. How could he allow someone to curry favor in front of the Yan Emperor? She didn't expose Shui Rui. Instead she said, "This person has the looks of a peach blossom. Before long trouble will come knocking on his door. Just wait and see." Shui Rui was amused. Only now did he know that her smile just now was a sign of schadenfreude and nothing else. The two of them chatted and laughed as they left the palace doors. Shui Rui could ride a sedan chair in the palace, but he was more willing to accompany her a bit longer. How could he not treasure the day and night companionship he had obtained after so much hardship? Today Shui Rui had asked her to go out for a stroll in the afternoon. He didn't say where. He only told her to dress more comfortably and that he would go pick her up. Speaking of which, although they were engaged, one was busy writing books and the other was busy reorganizing the Celestial Commissioner. They didn't even have the time to date. When Yu Shu returned home, she first had someone prepare hot water. After eating a bowl of nourishing yulu soup, she went to take a bath. She only needed to sit in the bathtub and there would be servants to wash her hair, wipe her back and massage her hands and feet. At this time of year, there was a fire dragon burning on the ground so she didn't feel cold. In the early years she wasn't used to having people serve her. But after she reached a high position, this habit slowly changed. It was really that she was tired enough outside. If she couldn't enjoy herself at home, then what was the use of working so hard to earn wealth and splendor? "When I go out later I'll find some light clothes," she ordered. The servant outside the bathroom door responded and turned to find Sister Exina, who was in charge of the clothes. When Yu Shu came out of the bath, she put on a woolen coat and returned to the bedroom through the small door. Exina had already tidied up the new clothes for this season. Even the boots and accessories were matched and placed in front of her. Yu Shu was not afraid of the cold this winter. It had snowed lightly the day before yesterday, and the sun had risen in the past 2 days. Yu Shu could withstand the cold but not the heat, so she asked the maidservants to put away her long fur coat and cloak. She picked out a set of green embroidered cotton linings with dark jade-colored flowers. The sleeves were trimmed with a black fox fur coat, and the cuffs were lined with a jade-green pleated long skirt. The skirt reached her heels and revealed a pair of thick black gold boots. She hung a string of crystal tassels around her waist and that was it. After smoking and drying her hair, she sat in front of the makeup mirror to do her makeup. She tied her hair into a peach bun and wore a popular sable hairpin flower with 2 agate hairpins. Her skin was white and didn't need to be powdered. She used a thin layer of rouge to dye her cheeks and a little bit on her lips. The most amazing thing was that pair of willow-shaped eyebrows that didn't need to be decorated. The center of her eyebrows was decorated with gold foil. When she looked in the mirror, she was a beautiful woman with skin of ice and bones of jade. She didn't dare to say anything else. "Miss, your eyebrows are so beautiful. It's a pity that you always draw them thick and sharp." Linner skillfully did her makeup and muttered. Seeing Exener frown at her, she didn't dare to say anything else. There were many rumors outside that their miss was a disfigured and unattractive woman. In fact, the scar between her eyebrows was not ugly. It was just that the miss liked to use cinnabar paste to paint it into an eye-catching firework. She insisted on drawing a pair of masculine eyebrows, which made people afraid to look at her face directly. Yushu looked in the mirror and also felt that she was prettier than usual. She looked more like a woman. However, she had no choice. She was the head of the Celestial Commissioner, a first-rank minister who was above everyone else. If she walked in the imperial court with this delicate and easily bullied appearance, how could she talk about prestige? Send someone to the front to see if Prince Ping's carriage has arrived. She stood up with the help of her maidservant and paced back and forth in the room twice. She slowed down her pace, which made her look like a lady from a noble family. After a while, a reply came from outside the door. Prince Ping had arrived and was waiting in the living room. Yushu picked little Kuei to follow her. She didn't bring many people and went straight to the front yard. When she walked outside the living room, she heard people talking and laughing inside. One of them was Shui Rui. The other was Yushio. Ah! Then that Zhaoda was scared and thought that he was really lame. He cried and shouted that he didn't dare to do it anymore. He begged for mercy with tears and snot all over his face. That's why I pulled out the hidden needle in his leg and let him go this time. I'm sure he won't dare to go to other medical centers to extort people. You did the right thing. This kind of villain who bullies the weak and fears the strong must be made to suffer the consequences of his actions. He won't harm people in the future. Yushu stood behind the door for a while. When she heard them chatting happily, she couldn't help but smile and walked in. What are you talking about? Shui Rui turned around and saw her new look. His heart palpitated. Other people wore red and yellow in winter to look warm, but she was the only one who wore such a cold color. She was equally suitable and had a very graceful demeanor. It was rare to see such a delicate look, and it made his heart melt. When Yushu saw his passionate gaze, she knew that her makeup was correct. She glanced at him and turned to her younger brother. Why did you come back so early today? Yushio grinned. Hu Tian asked me to accompany him to pick out a birthday gift for his little sister in the afternoon, so father let me go home first. I happened to meet your highness at the door, so I will entertain the guest for you. Thanks to Yushu, Papa, who was not removed from his position and banished from his family. He was still working as an assistant minister in the Ministry of Rights. It was a pity that his father-in-law Guo Huai'en, the Chancellor of the Supreme Court, had his heart set on becoming an official and was unwilling to stay in the court. Remembering their past friendship, Shui Rui begged the Emperor of Yen to allow him to retire and was not punished. You're going out, right? Then quickly go. Yushio got up and walked out. When he passed by Yushu, he winked at her with his back facing Shui Rui. He turned back and said, Your Highness, don't forget what we just said. When you have time, you will take me to the outskirts to ride horses and hunt. Shui Rui agreed. He waited until Shui Rui could no longer be seen before he said to Yushu, Did you tell him everything? Xiaoxiu was a bit repulsed by his new identity. Today he acted out of character and became close to him. It was clear that he knew something. Yushu's tone was helpless. Who let this brat not forget his big brother Shui? If I don't tell him, he will think that I am a heartless person. You sister and brother are both people who value relationships. Shui Rui went forward to hold her hand and looked down at her eyes. He turned to the side to block the view outside the living room and gently pecked between her eyebrows. A shoe looks good no matter what. Yushu poked his chin with a finger and pushed his face away. The corners of her eyes and mouth were full of smiles. Where are we going? Let's go for a walk. Shui Rui kept her in suspense and pulled her along as they walked outside. Yushu tried to pull her hand away but failed, so she just let him be. When the servants on duty in the front courtyard saw this, most of them secretly smiled and turned their backs to avoid making the pair feel uncomfortable. Shui Rui brought her all the way to the front of the carriage and supported her waist to get on the carriage. The curtains of the carriage were drawn down, and only then did he reveal his thoughts. At that time, I had to use the name of brother and sister to get close to you and meet you in secret. I have waited for so long, but I can finally walk next to you openly. Yushu felt a trace of sadness from his words. She held his arm and leaned on his shoulder. She softly responded, I have also been looking forward to this day. Shui Rui was satisfied and no longer lamented the past. He turned to talk about marriage with her. Our wedding date is set for the 12th month. In another half a month, the Wang Fu will be ready and the Ministry of Rights will send the betrothal gifts. That is the grace of the Emperor. Because the national treasury is empty, it won't be too rich. Don't feel wronged, I will give you another one later. Yu Shu heard this and raised her head, reminding him, "Didn't you give me your share a long time ago?" When they parted 5 years ago, he had solemnly given her all of his wealth as a betrothal gift. Wang Jilu was his blood, sweat and tears. That 50,000 taels of gold was his wealth. He could give everything for her, she didn't have to feel wronged. The two of them sat in the carriage, going from the north of the city to the south, stopping and walking along the way. Shui Rui said that he would take her out for a stroll, but it wasn't aimlessly, but to revisit old places. First, they went to Osmanthus Square, the street where they reunited after they parted in Eyang. "You had a fortune-telling stall outside this tea-house, do you still remember?" Shui Rui sat in the carriage, pointing at the old tea-house across the street. "Of course I remember." Yu Shu thought of it, angry and amused. "That day I was humiliated, you saw it all and you pretended not to know me. Really hateful." Shui Rui shook his head. He pointed at a seat at the bottom of the tea-house and told her, "Then you definitely don't know about it. Because I saw you being bullied, I investigated the gangs that collect rent on this street and dug out their backer. I taught them a good lesson and helped you vent your anger." Yu Shu hadn't heard him mention it. Shui Rui let the coachman continue to go south. Soon they arrived at another place that Yu Shu was familiar with. There was an alley on Huaxing Street, and there was a small courtyard in the alley, which was the first place she settled in the capital. At that time she, Xiaoxiu Jingchen and she lived together. Anxia Jiangmin lived under the same roof. The carriage stopped by the roadside and Shui Rui and she got out of the carriage and walked forward. There were ordinary people living nearby, and suddenly they saw a man and a woman dressed in brocade clothes appear at the intersection. They all looked at them. Shui Rui and Yu Shu didn't care about the eyes of others, and walked past the crowded places. When they were about to reach the entrance of the alley, Shui Rui suddenly stopped, and Yu Shu walked past him 2 steps, looking back at him. "What's wrong?" Shui Rui faintly said, "You must not know, during the time you lived here, every time I sent you to the entrance of the alley, I would see you disappear. I had to see you disappear before I was willing to leave. I always hoped that you would look back at me." At that time her heart belonged to someone else. She avoided him, and if it wasn't for his perseverance, how could she wait for her to look back? Yu Shu was stunned, and from his short words she could feel his disappointment and loneliness that day. Her heart trembled and she blurted out to him, "Isn't it simple? Just stand there and don't move." As she spoke she retreated. She turned her back and took a step forward, then turned her head to look at him. Then she turned her back and took another step forward, then turned her head to look at him. She continued like this until his face was full of smiles, so bright that it was not even as bright as the setting sun. After leaving Huaxing Street, Shui Rui took her to the old residence where the siblings and Zhao Hui's family lived in the south of the city. They went to the Cheongyu building of the Twin Sons Association on the Spring Lawn River. They went to the Jade Lion Lake where they went boating in the summer. Of course there was also the Wangji building where they pledged their love. Every time they went to a place, he could tell her something she didn't know, which made her feel moved and distressed. She was waiting for him and more for his sincerity. When night fell, the carriage stopped in front of the Dinghua Hall. After dark, the temperature suddenly dropped. Shui Rui tied a cloak for her to keep out the cold, and led her into the inner courtyard. Zhongbo was waiting for them to come back. When he saw Yu Shu, he bowed and greeted, "I haven't seen you for a long time, how are you?" Yu Shu nodded to him and said in a pleasant tone, "Zhongbo has worked hard to take care of Wang Ye these days." Zhongbo smiled, it's not hard, it's this old servant's duty. The garden is ready with food and wine, Wang Ye and Miss, please go." Looking at their figures walking hand in hand, he looked very gratified. He could watch the eldest young master start a family in place of the dead master, which could be considered as repaying the kindness. The garden of the Dinghua Hall was different. There was a natural lake here and the lake was very deep. On the lake there was a stone bridge that was more than 30 feet long. Because the bridge was engraved with hundreds of birds flying, every night, the quiet lake would reflect the bright starry sky. The whole bridge was like it was built on the Milky Way, so it was jokingly called the Magpie Bridge. Unfortunately there were few stars tonight, and there were no lights on the bridge. The lake was dark, so they couldn't see the beautiful scenery of the Magpie Bridge flying in the sky. In the waterside pavilion by the lake, there was a table of exquisite food and wine. There was a fire in the 4 corners to warm them, and 2 bamboo curtains hung down, blocking the east wind, so people didn't feel cold at all. With the silver moon accompanying it, it added a lot of interest. "I propose a toast to my eldest brother. I wish you good health and success in your dreams." Yu Shu filled the cup and offered it to Shui Rui. Shui Rui held her wrist but didn't take the cup. His eyes flickered and he said embarrassedly, "Although I like to hear you call me eldest brother, it's not intimate enough, and it'll be even more inappropriate when we're husband and wife. Can you change the way you address me?" Yu Shu was deeply in love with him, so she went along with him. "Then what should I call you?" Shui Rui pretended to raise his head and thought for a while, then he said in distress, "Now that I've changed my name, it's not appropriate for you to call me Qingbi. Then should I call you by your current name? Shining?" Shui Rui shook his head. "This is the name my birth mother gave me, so I can't help but feel sad. I don't want you to call me by this name. Why don't you give me another courtesy name?" "How can I do that?" Yu Shu didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she heard his nonsensical words. "Isn't this nonsense? Courtesy names are bestowed by elders. How can you just randomly give it to someone else?" Unexpectedly, Shui Rui was serious. His expression didn't look like he was joking at all. "My name is nothing more than a title to me, and it gives me no sense of belonging. You're the closest person to me in this world. You know my background, understand my past, and will accompany me for the rest of my life. I hope to have a mark with a different meaning, to be branded on my body so that I'll never forget who I am no matter what. Ashu, can you give it to me?" Yu Shu was silent for a long time. She freed a hand and dipped it into the wine in the cup, writing stroke by stroke on the table in front of him. She joked, "You know that I haven't read much and that I'm a commoner who can't even read a few words, yet you insist on making things difficult for me. Since you've given it to me, you can't change it even if you don't like it." Shui Rui stared unblinkingly at her fingertips as she wrote a word neatly on the table. When he saw this word clearly, his frown relaxed and a smile bloomed on his face. His dark eyes lit up like fireworks as bright as the stars. Yu Shu softly recited, "A gentleman is like jade, like Jin Yu is a beautiful piece of jade. Big brother is a man who values relationships and promises, and is wise and brave beyond compare. In my heart, you're the one and only gentleman, my husband." The word husband that came out of her mouth was exceptionally pleasing to the ear, and not only did it have a deeper meaning. Husband sounded like husband, and was clearly calling her Yu Shu's husband. It was full of affection and it was very pleasant to listen to. "Good, from now on I'm your husband." Shui Rui held up her wrist and leaned forward to finish the cup of wine before taking away the empty cup. After that, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her up from her seat and brought her into his embrace. After that, he turned towards the railing and embraced her flexible waist. He held her hand tightly as he lowered his head and stared at her face with deep affection. "Do you still remember that year at the gentleman's hibiscus banquet? I jumped into the bottom of the lake to find a hibiscus lantern made of real gold? In order to obtain a golden jade hibiscus, even if I couldn't publicly confess to you, I still had to let you see my true feelings. You definitely don't know, but I'm not a good swimmer. When I jumped in, I only had one thought in my mind: even if I died, I wouldn't give you to anyone else. Fortunately, I did it in the end." The emotions that Yu Shu had been accumulating for a day at this moment, like a crazily rising tide. She didn't know how to express her love. Just as she was about to open her mouth, she saw the dark lake behind him explode with a boom, and a dazzling red light burst out. Countless dancing sparks were like meteors, streaking across the silent lake surface. The sky was full of phosphorescence flashing from the opposite shore to the front. Countless red lotus lanterns were ignited on the lake surface, like a sea of flowers blooming under the moon. The Magpie Bridge in the middle of the lake appeared out of thin air. It was actually thousands of lanterns on the bridge spanning across the Milky Way. The scene was so beautiful that she couldn't bear to blink, and then he stole her lines: "Life and death are separated and we have a promise. I only wish to hold your hand and grow old with you. Husband." To be continued. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.